calling this meeting to order. Thank you very much for being here on a Sunday evening. Let the roll show all are in attendance. Before we get started, I want to just make a couple of comments. One, tonight we're actually getting an opportunity to potentially, maybe the last meeting for Al Lichtenberg, who has served this district for 9 years. And so his term is ending, and our next regular scheduled meeting is May 10th. I think we have a May 5th meeting, but the normal election is May 1st. So Al, we're going to bring you back to do a more celebratory time with you, and just to note your service. But over 9 years, you have given this district immeasurable time, energy, volunteerism, and we're just so thankful for your service to this community, to this board, and to the school district. Thank you. Okay, item 5 is public comments related to non-agenda items. Do we have any comments, Stacy? Okay.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Stacy Dillon. I have the pleasure of serving as the assistant to the superintendent and the board of trustees for the Lovejoy Independent School District. I'll be leading the public comments this evening related to non-agenda and agenda items. We do ask that you please respect the rules that we gave you. Each person speaking will have 3 minutes. When you have 1 minute remaining, we will hold up this sign. And when your 3 minutes has expired, we will hold up this sign. So we will begin this evening with Chad Lindsay.
Okay, we're going. I'll try to make it quick. I spoke 2 board meetings ago on communications. I think it was 2 ago. And I just wanted to highlight something. This meeting I knew about because I was at the last meeting. I also could have found out if I scrolled through about 5 pages of board brief or done about 5 or 6 clicks on the website. That's not the communication that we're talking about. We're talking about put it in people's faces, getting out there. There's a meeting. We are voting on something very important. Please be involved. That's the communication I'm talking about. And that's why people are frustrated. They're not finding out because it's buried. You have to go dig to find information. Information is important as this vote. Information is important as canceling busing. Information is important as adding new transfer students. That should be put in people's faces. That should be thrown out there and forced on them. And you're not doing that. So I just wanted to highlight, I spoke about it before and I said, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This meeting should have been thrown in people's faces. That's all I wanted to say.
That was the only public comment this evening related to non-agenda items. We will now move to public comments related to agenda items, and we'll start with Cynthia Brugge.
Good evening, board. Thank you for being here tonight. So all of the discussion that we've had about consolidating our elementary school has caused me to think back on when we decided to build a K-12 program. Everybody knows that our kids were bound for Allen ISD, where they were offering every kind of program to prepare our kids for adulthood. And they do. They have a lot of programs. They could compete with us from a totally different perspective. But we chose to offer something different, an intimate environment, but slower pace, smaller classrooms, more opportunity to participate in multiple activities rather than focus on one talent, focus more on participation than being the very best at everything, and focus on the Lovejoy profile. And we've accomplished so much. We have all of our facilities constructed. We have programs. We have our foundation. We have a good reputation. And even just what we're doing with the baseball program, that's an opportunity that we have. That's like the next step. And I believe that we're making a huge mistake if we consolidate this elementary school. I've been selling real estate out here for 10 years, and I believe that it is a big mistake. You're focused on what you can save instead of the behavior of people that move to areas where there is wealth. And I'm not saying rich. I'm just saying people that are investing their time to dream about their kids and to give them the very best they can. And they're sacrificing so much. Every client that I've worked with has sacrificed to be here. And they love this area. And what you're doing, if you do this, you are going to tear down the premise of everything that we began with. Every crisis that I've seen, I'm 64 today, I've seen economic crises from the early 80s all the way through in different forms of mortgage and real estate industry. And it always bounces back where people move to quality. Focus on the quality. Let's get back to the basics of what we wanted to build. If you think about it, we had nothing when we started. You know, I beg you to listen to the people that live here. This is not just the parents that have kids here. Every parent of the 3 schools is going to be adversely affected by this decision. Don't save a few to lose out in the end. We can make this up. And I'd like to say one pitch for my constituents in Fairview. We are an underserved community in the McKinney School District. We do not have an elementary school. So please give opportunity to those residents, the ones in Lucas that are down on Winningcoff Road, and our residents that are over here on Meandering Way. We have a new development at Apple Crossing that's right by Puster. And we have Sloan Creek that has a bridge that could take you right over to Puster. So please consider that. Thank you.
Tressa Fisher.
Hi, I've spoken up here before. So I moved here about 4 years ago. I live in the Country Brook neighborhood right here next to the school. I've already talked about how I moved here for the school. I've talked to so many neighbors about this whole situation, and any of those that don't have elementary students are very upset about this whole situation. Within my neighborhood this year, I've seen about a 1/5 overturn in homes of empty nesters leaving. Our neighborhood is 19 years old. We are now at the age where seniors are just now these initial families, first homeowners, children are now graduating, have just graduated, and are starting to just turn their homes over. So this process, we're going to see a big rollover right now. And the second this is starting to happen, we're saying, oh, there's no empty nesters. We're done. We're out of here. But I am seeing that even just the house behind me is listing the house next week, an empty nester. The house across from me, their youngest is a sophomore in high school. In 2 years, they told me they are moving. In 2 years, as soon as he graduates. These are turning over. They don't want to pay these high sales tax in this area, the property taxes, just to be empty nesters. They are going to be moving. And it is now the time where we're going to be seeing this rolling. So I think we're making this decision too soon. I'm also seeing, seems like there's an inconsistency in the numbers of the capacity of students in the schools. Those numbers have been fluctuating. And what if our numbers increase? What if these young families, which I'm seeing come and roll into my neighborhood, keep coming in? And then all of a sudden, if we're pushed to 2 schools, and we're going to be pushing those limits, supposedly for the 1-to-22 ratio, which is a big reason why people move here to Lovejoy, that those numbers will be jammed. I have a friend that even here at Lovejoy, whose daughter's in 3rd grade, her classroom has 26 students because there can be written exceptions to expand your class sizes if there's too many children. So it's already happening. And then we were told that we brought up the idea of what if we fill our elementary with tuition students? And they said, well, then that will overflow the secondary schools too much. Then how in the world were we ever above 60% capacity if we had more students that would overflow the secondaries? And so I don't think we have a ton of wiggle room. They're saying the max capacity is 1364 and our moderate growth estimation for next year is 1321. That's only about 40 students. So if we get all of a sudden more move-ins, that will overflow. And then this school, all the money will be put into this building to make it into a preschool. The changes will already be done. And then we'll be like, oh man, now we don't have room. We're beyond our capacity of what we exclaim Lovejoy to be. And then we won't have another building to come back to because the work will already have been done. And so please consider these things that are just now happening, rolling. This is too quick to make this decision. Changes are happening right now. Thank you for your time.
So I apologize in advance if I mispronounce any names this evening. Morgan Bouret. Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Morgan Bourret. I am a fourth grader here at Lovejoy Elementary. Here at Lovejoy Elementary, it is not just a place of learning, but a place where you can make so many friends that are as close as family. Not only do they teach you how to read and write, they also teach you how to be loyal, honest, and a good friend. This is a place where you lose your first tooth, read your first chapter book, hatch your own chicks, and so many more unforgettable experiences. If you close this amazing school, I fear for my teachers who are the best. These are the teachers that comfort you about STAR, who will work with you until you know and understand everything. Teachers like Mrs. Waits, Mrs. Nicholson, Mr. Knight, Mr. Doty, and so many more. Not only am I worried for the teachers, but I am also worried for the staff, such as the librarian, Mrs. Dawson, who always makes sure that you have something to read, and the principal, Mrs. Kraft. I do not want these people to be without a job. If you close our school, there will be lots of traffic, since all of the people zoned for Lovejoy Elementary would have to go to Hart or Puster, which is further away, and everybody would have to take the same one-lane road. Please keep our wonderful school and say no to losing it. Thank you for your time.
Mary Dickinson.
Good evening, board. Thanks for convening tonight and for all of your time. We do appreciate you. As you know, where most of us as a part of the Keep All Three parent group stands, we've asked y'all to hold off just for 1 year so that we could work with you and do our due diligence together and maybe get more information to help us through some of these efficiencies. You have the ability still, obviously, not knowing a vote and you haven't voted, you still have the ability for us to go and work together on some of these things. What we'd ask for you to do in that time frame is to, one, have a traffic study done so that we all of the parents can feel more comfortable as to what we're all going into and how we can prepare. Two, a lot of us feel that the demographic studies that have been conducted need to be redone. We're all experiencing so many different things, and COVID has changed everything, has changed who's coming into our Metroplex, who's leaving, who's taking advantage of this economy. I'd also like to say that I really think that it would be prudent, and I work in the architecture field and we talk with K through 12 all the time, right? We've been working on plans to keep these kids safe for a year. And now, as we're going into not social distancing our kids, and we're going to take all of them and put them into 2 elementary schools and really pack them into sardines, it causes a lot of concern. So I'd ask that an assessment done be of both schools as to how we might be able to keep them safe. You know, what is the air quality of the space going to be? What other measures are going to be put into place when so much is going to be potentially taken away? We also, you know, are pretty concerned about what's next. We continue to run into deficiencies each year in terms of our budget. And so we're wondering, what is it next that the community is going to have to prepare themselves to encounter? Can we get ahead of that in working with you? I think the big thing for us as K through 4 parents is that what we're experiencing is the heart of Lovejoy is really celebrated when we talk about the heart in the higher grades, 9th through 12th. And it's great because they have incredible performance. What we would ask the board to do, though, in making a decision like this, is to really keep our little guys in your hearts and in your minds. And we'd ask for what we're doing and where we put all of our efforts and our time and our money be redistributed across all of the grade levels. Thank you.
Jennifer Zimmerman.
Again, thank you for taking the week to look at the numbers, look at all our concerns. We really do appreciate that you did that. I had a hard time figuring out what I wanted to say tonight because I feel like a lot of it's been said, but I just want to get this off my chest. I'm just disappointed in the lack of communication from the administration, and that's not a knock on Dr. Womack. Our superintendent left, a few months ago. This is not all on him, but just the lack of communication about the budget and the transparency of the actual budget. We've had a really hard time getting our hands on the actual numbers. Why was this not discussed months ago? We could have had time to problem solve and fundraise. I'm disappointed the tuition piece was removed prematurely from the budget because it was assumed the bill would pass, and now the tuition clause has been removed from the legislation. I'm disappointed in the lack of insight into the effect on the traffic and safety going from 3 to 2 campuses the district has provided. There was a head-on collision on Country Club Friday night. It happens almost every time it rains. I'm disappointed the effects of COVID at these 2 campuses with having no masks, no social distancing, no virtual option, an increase in student density, and no vaccines available to kids under 12 on the students has not been discussed. I'm disappointed it hasn't been explored to add pre-K to each campus, which would not only generate revenue, but also improve the efficiency of the campuses. I'm disappointed the demographers' numbers seem so off to the data a mom gathered over the last week on the population of future K through 4 students, and she'll be speaking to that in a minute. I'm sad that our sweet little ones could be paying for bad decisions and poor planning. I urge you to please postpone the closing of Lovejoy for 1 year, just to further look into all of these things. Thank you.
Thomas Arsenio. I'm not sure that I got that right. Okay.
Hello, my name is Tom Arsenault, and my wife and I have lived in the Lovejoy School District for 18 years. And for 18 years, for at least since 2005, money issues have been a part of the Lovejoy School District. But first and foremost, I just want to state that the parents of Lovejoy are the main reason for the school district's success, the parents. This can't be overstated. And it's about quality of life. We moved here for a quality of life. And everybody moves here for a quality of life. The schools are a part of that quality of life. But when you damage the schools, it damages every other part of the quality of life. And that's what you're doing. There has been no studies done on traffic. That 10-year study, that traffic study that's 10 years ago is useless because that very study is a study that the engineers of Fairview and Lucas have told me when I've talked to them have prevented them from getting lights and preventing them from getting additional turn-ins, specifically for Sloan Creek and a light near Puster. Those 2 areas, both Hart and Puster, have major problems as far as drop-off and pickups. I made a run, and it took me from my house near Lovejoy 25 minutes for a round trip to go to Puster in the morning for a drop-off and 50 minutes for a pickup. Now you're adding 120 to 150 cars going to Puster, 120 to 150 cars going to Hart. 2 bad situations. We are going to be sitting in our cars for an hour and a half to 2 hours every single day. Every day. That's not quality of life. We wouldn't have moved here if that would have happened. But now this is what we face. We face all these people who have taken the sacrifice of paying 20% over cost of building a house or moving into a house and paying higher property taxes than anybody else in this area. And this is what we get. We're the ones who have made this school district and sacrificed to make this school district what it is today. And we feel like you've turned your back on us. No studies. What do you think is going to happen when we cram all these kids? Because the capacity issue that has been brought up is true. You're showing 1250 capacity for Hart and Puster. And yet we have over 1,300 kids right now in the K through 4. We are overcrowding the schools, and we've had kids wearing masks for a year, washing their hands multiple times every day for a year. They're all going to have compromised immune systems when they go to school in the fall. And that has to happen. We've got to take it off. It's just going to get worse. What do you think is going to happen when they finally get exposed to all each other with a mask? It is going to be a disaster. The kids are going to get sick. They're going to get sick anyway. It's going to be worse when you cram them all together. My other question, trying to go as fast as I can, is why when we were offering transfers, did we go and say that people who live in our community get first choice? That would have protected our property values. Thank you.
Scott Thomas.
Known as Micah's husband. So no one can argue. Oh, yeah, I'm kind of taller than the last few people, especially Morgan. That's good. Yeah. All right. I'm gonna go first. She starts the time. No one can argue that the two highest priorities of this district are the academic excellence and the safety of all kids, not just secondary kids, but particularly the youngest kids in elementary schools. In fact, that's two of the stated priorities for this board. This board, I didn't know this till I looked on the internet today. This board has 5 priorities. Those are academic achievement, effective communication, being the employer of choice for educators, implementing best practices for safety and security, and protecting the heart of Lovejoy. A lot's been said about protecting the heart of Lovejoy, but that's not the only priority. The board cannot abandon the other priorities, including those relating to security and the priority that, quote, the personal needs of Lovejoy students are addressed. However, we're facing cuts that will defund both the security program and some academic service programs for elementary students. For example, elimination of reading interventionists at the elementary schools, and elimination of half of the funding for security and over half of the security officer positions. Now, this district and board have asked the parents to help with security, and my wife and I are happy to help, and a lot of parents are, and I hope everyone will. But the administration and the board cannot just ask for donations, stop there, and avoid difficult decisions. Other efforts must be made to minimize the budget cuts to the district's core principles of academics and safety for all students. It would be careless to make cuts to these core programs without charging pay-to-play fees for extracurricular activities. You can't just cut costs, you got to get revenue. Someone else said that earlier. Now, this may have been a historically difficult decision in this district. It's a no-brainer now. Other districts do it. Highland Park does it. Coppell does it. Now, don't get me wrong. I love athletics. I grew up, my dad was a college football coach, athletic director. From diapers to college, I was in locker rooms. It's important, I get it. But by definition, these are extracurricular activities. They're not more important than our children's safety. They're not more important than ensuring the youngest of our students that need help with reading intervention get it to build the foundation for secondary school. And if we're going to go to 2 elementary schools, I'm not saying we should, but if we do, we should make sure those 2 schools have every resource necessary to fulfill the priorities to keep every child safe and make sure every child's personal needs are met. If it takes charging pay-to-play fees to do it, we should do it. Mr. Collins, at the last meeting, you said some constituents don't want the pay-to-play fees. But the board's stated priorities don't have anything to do with athletics or pay-to-play. They have to do with safety, they have to do with security and meeting the personal needs. Those are the things that you'll be graded on. You can ask Morgan what happens when you go 0 for 5 on a test. Okay? Hard times call for hard decisions. You've asked that the parents help financially, and many of us will do it. But don't stop there. Make the right decision and put academics and safety first. Fully fund the security program, and charge those pay-to-play fees, even if it's a hard decision. It's the right decision.
Amy Russell.
Okay, I don't know that I'll do as good of a job as my daughter did last week. But I just have some concerns over the choice to close the elementary school. One of my big concerns is what's next? We close it this year, and then next year we have budget issues again, and then what's on the table to be eliminated? That really scares me as a parent. What else can be out there to be eliminated? I don't see things magically improving over the next year. My other concern is that we are new to the district as of last year. We came when my oldest was entering middle school. I have 4 kids. So with me came 2 that went to elementary school. I understand that young families aren't going to move in here, but what are you going to do about the more mature families that have the older kids that they want to experience a secondary education, who are also bringing elementary school students? And then I don't know. Once you close the school, it's a done deal. You can't open it back up. And if overcrowding begins, yes, you can expand on Hart and Puster, but that just increases traffic. And I don't see it being a good solution in the long run. And I mean, as somebody else pointed out, my next door neighbor has a senior and a freshman. She has already told me once both her boys are out, she's selling. It's a giant house. I can't see somebody without children not moving in. So thank you for your time. I know this is a very, very difficult decision, and I just hope that you make the best one for our community.
Mark Brugge.
So I'd like to just thank all the board members. I know you guys have only tough jobs. My kids have all graduated. They're all awesome. They're all prepared to be successful in life. And a huge part of that is Lovejoy. But I've been sitting on the outside just observing, and it's obvious to me, if I was calling the shots, I'd be making my decisions based upon my kids first. Then I'd be making decisions about the parents, because without the parents, none of this happens. They make all the money, they buy the houses. And I'd be making my decisions based upon my teachers, because they're the ones touching my kids on a daily basis. They're interacting with them. And then it'd be the administrative staff. But yet, I see the decisions recently made, and it seems like the parents, I mean, I do think that you're trying to make best efforts for the kids, but it seems like the parents, you're asking them to make huge sacrifices, like give up buses. But I don't see you going to the administrative staff and say, you know, hey guys, we're going to have to make huge cuts here before we can ask parents to make sacrifices. And from what I understand, I think our first superintendent drove a school bus. Now, I don't know how realistic that is to ask anyone to drive a school bus, but it's the mentality that they're seeing. And I think what you're hearing a lot of from these people is that you guys aren't really, you're stuck in a box where you feel like you have to make certain cuts, but you're not willing to look at other things. Like, you know, if it requires you to get rid of 1/3 of your administrative staff and make the other 2/3 pick up the slack, suck it up. You're asking parents to do it. You suck it up. So I also would highly recommend that you stop looking at the same sources for information, because they're just going to give you the same information. You're going to go to the same people, outside counseling, which I think is a great idea, but there are other countries in the world like Finland who just excel, and they have a whole other different way of educating their kids. They pay their teachers really well, but the teachers have a lot of flexibility to make a lot of decisions, and I think you should empower teachers and figure out how to empower teachers and get good teaching, and to get rid of, in my opinion, some of the administrative staff before you start asking parents to make these type of sacrifices. Again, I appreciate what you're doing, and I know these are tough decisions that nobody would want to have to make. So thank you.
Ryan Smith.
I'll just tilt it up. How about that? All right. Well, I didn't think that I would be here advocating to save Lovejoy Elementary. I figured that I would someday be here advocating for a totally different reason. But I am here, and parents are here because we believe that this campus and what we bought into the Lovejoy spirit for still exists and deserves to still exist. You know, I think it says something about us that even with the prior financial difficulties that we had, we were willing as a community to step up and make the sacrifice. I was here 3 years ago at every school board meeting, and I listened to all the reasons why we needed to raise the tax rate to the top level to meet all the other school districts so that we could make our ends meet. And this community came together and voted to deliver that for you guys. It was narrow, but we delivered it. And I think at that time, we should have been thinking about the fact that maybe lean times would come again. But it doesn't feel like we did, because here we are now paying for our own buses. We asked the community to pay for their own buses, and guess what? We did. Every year, there is a fundraiser or fundraisers for each one of these schools to help make ends meet. And the community comes and steps up again. But now here we are, after all the sacrifice that we've made, and this is on the chopping blocks. And I've got to ask, how did we get here? What does it say about us if we have to buy our own buses because the school cannot provide that for us? Other school districts are facing the same challenges that Lovejoy have, but the school buses doesn't seem to be on the chopping blocks for other school districts. What does it say about us if we have to close one of our schools down in such a rapid fashion that we haven't done the due diligence of what the impact of that's going to be as we push more traffic north and south on Country Club? It seems to me like what I'm hearing is that there isn't enough information to make the decision you are poised to make today. So I encourage you to please do not make the decision to close this school without having provided the community, of which you've asked so much for, the information that we need to feel confident that this decision that you are about to make is one that's going to deliver and continue to deliver for all of us, no matter where we live, this Lovejoy experience. One last question. How many of you have children in this school right now? It worries me that no hands went up. And maybe that's why our school is on this chopping block, is because maybe we don't have advocates sitting on that side of the table. Because if you do have kids here, then you should be fighting like hell, like we are, to keep this school open. Thank you so much.
Abji Basu.
Good evening, everybody. And thank you for serving on the board. I wanted to come, and before I was coming here, I was thinking, how should I represent myself? Should I be bluntly honest, or should be impolitely or politely dishonest? What I heard on the street is that this board is so brutal that people leave the board. But I also heard that the board is going to make the decision. They have already made the decision, and all this is a facade. When in democracy that happens, Rome falls. And Caesar didn't exist today, right? Napoleon has fallen. And that's exactly what's going to happen. It's a small city. Most of my life, I've lived in big cities, and I've fought these things where I saw dishonest people running offices. But here, I don't believe that is the case. I think it's just mismanagement. In a budget of 35 million, when somebody drops 6 million deficit, somebody's not doing their job. And it's not
shameful to just say, yeah, I messed up and I'll resign. So somebody better can come and help. That is how democracies can thrive. That's first. Second, as I drive my daughter to high school, it takes almost 20, 25 minutes to drop her for every test. And my background is air quality and education. I sit on North Central Coalition of Governments, Texas governments, and I represent the air quality impact on health. At that point in moment, 25 minutes, it is in unattainment. It's over 12 micrograms per cubic meter. Now, if you do this, whatever you're doing, it's going to make a consistent during those hour in the morning and hour in the evening. That will absolutely put you into unattainment. I've already asked the Lucas government to look at GHG, which is greenhouse gas emissions in the community. It's going to suddenly put us in unattainment. So there will be other consequences because of that. But finally, the main point that I see that is happening is the finances. And I come from corporate board. In this kind of situation, we let go of board members because 20% of your budget deficit is not acceptable. The other thing that is important is you have to involve the community. I'm not very happy to see that the community is not represented very well here. I'm very disappointed, actually. When in democracy, when people are not coming to make their voice heard, people like you can sit on the other side and make whatever decisions you can. Perfect. But compassion. The land I come from, I always ask myself one question before making any decision. And I've made some serious decisions in life. Compassion. When I make that decision, am I favoring people the best I can do for them? If not, I'm more than happy to resign. Thank you.
Audria Payne.
Thank you. Okay. I'm not a public speaker, so I'm going to try to hold it together. And I thank all of you guys for what you're doing. So we've been part of this district for at least 10 years, and I've seen a lot of change. I'm a mother and an aunt of a Lovejoy Elementary student. I have a child at Slum Creek and a future Lovejoy leopard at home. I have concerns about the proposal for the close of the school and turning it into a preschool and administration. I realize we have a budget shortfall and we're facing a budget shortfall and we need to address budget cuts, but the children and their education is really what should be put first. The information about declining enrollment in the elementary and the administration that has shown us the past 3 meetings really to me doesn't add up. And so with a group of friends and some support of the community, I started adding up my own data. I sent each one of you guys an email about this. So in the past few days, we started to collect data on our own, and the information that come from numerous students from birth to 4th grade in neighborhoods around Lovejoy Elementary. We weren't able to capture everyone because it was such a short time. But there were so many young families here and more families moving into our community is what we discovered. And there wasn't a massive decline in enrollment that was stated. I also learned that at least 6 new families have purchased homes or in the process of purchasing a home that feed into this elementary school, and all of them had 2 or more children. From the little time and research that we discovered from this matter, it was consistent that the Lovejoy kiddos are moving up each year and there was no major decline. Second thing I want to tell about is the future plans for the crowded classrooms and the overcrowding of schools. I know everyone has talked about that, but we have to think about that if that's a decision you're going to make. Third, I think it's premature to make this decision that we don't have kindergarten roundup numbers, we don't have the pandemic numbers coming in, and we don't have the families that are in the process of purchasing homes to come to our district because of our reputation. Fourth, I think that if we do a preschool, why can't we keep all 3 schools? Why can't we have a preschool program that does Little Hearts with the teacher employees and have PPCD all together? Like, what a great program that is. I have an education background in early childhood, and I can tell you from neighboring districts, it works. Fifth, what about the special ed kids at this school? Nobody has said anything about those kiddos. And those kiddos are the ones that take the biggest heartache from change and disruption in their days. That's not fair to them or their families. I thank each one of you, and I respect all of you. And I can tell you as a Christian, I have prayed for you guys more than anything. So thank you for your decision.
Michelle Reed.
Good evening. Thank you. So I'm a lawyer and I defend boards of directors. And when I defend boards of directors, when I evaluate transactions, we look at first whether they're conflicted. I'll mention that not one of the members of the board of directors has a child at Lovejoy Elementary currently. That's troubling to me in that we're making this decision. I know we can't change that. So then what do we look at when we have a conflicted board of directors? We look at 2 things. Was there a fair process and was there a fair price? I would posit that we have neither here. First, we have no fair process. We were notified of this on the first time on March 25th, not sufficient. Secondly, you're relying on legislation that has not passed and language that is presently at least to be stricken from the legislation on the tuition issue. Third, the Texas Education Code section 11.253E says that the campus level committee shall be involved in decisions in the areas of planning, budgeting, curriculum, staffing patterns, etc. Closing an elementary school should have certainly involved the planning level and the campus level committee. In addition, this is not a fair price or outcome for this school district or for people. First of all, look at your administration costs. We have evaluated the data submitted to the TEA. The data submitted to the TEA shows that we spend on average $300 per student more than our comparable districts including districts such as Eames, Highland Park, Carroll ISD, Prosper, etc. When you look at that, that's $1.2 million in administration expense that we have here that is embedded in our budget and has been embedded for years. That needs to change. We are overspending. Take a good, hard look at that expenditures and don't tell us you're eliminating administrative positions by eliminating open positions. You need to look at what those expenditures are and evaluate it. We are not meeting our peers. Highland Park's about 700, Eames is about 650, Capella is at 550, Carroll is at about 650, Prosper is at 450. We are at $925 per student. If that doesn't require some very deep looks and some serious cuts, I don't know what does. Next, I'll add, we have a capacity issue. You are going to be looking down a capacity issue tomorrow if you pass this. In our church family, we have a church family that is only in Lovejoy ISD. In the last year, we have had 70 people move into the ward. 70 people move into our church family, and 25 of which are 13 and under. You are going to see a capacity issue with COVID. Second, I have a special education student. He benefited seriously from the benefits of Lovejoy, which is our only school with a great life skills program. You will not have the space that I think is required pursuant to federal law if you do this decision. And finally, we do not have a fair outcome in transportation. Presently, when you eliminated the buses, I bus my 4 kids from 6:45 in the morning until 8:45 in the morning. Don't put this on the back of the parents and small children, and we beg you, give us 1 more year.
Aubrey Stock.
Good evening, board. I think Michelle said it all, but I would just echo that I don't think this is an appropriate time to make this decision. I don't think enough due diligence has been done. I think you need more time.
Last board meeting, we talked a lot about constituents saying you have a responsibility to be financially efficient. You also have a responsibility to be logistically efficient. I'll just nail on transportation. For example, this past week, I have a first grader. She's my oldest. I will have 3 more coming up. They called me to tell me that she would need to be on the bus 10 minutes earlier. So that would put her at about 6:40 every morning because of unexpected traffic issues and construction. And my only reaction was to laugh, unfortunately, and they said, oh, we're so sorry. And I said, I just don't know what you're going to do next year. Are you going to spend every morning on the phone calling parents and saying, I'm sorry, the bus will have to come 10 minutes earlier, 20 minutes earlier. Have you thought about that for these little kids who are going to have to ride the bus? Because we've talked a lot about parents going back and forth, and the response has been, well, we're going to have an increase in busing. We haven't even talked about that. None of the questions last week talked about any logistically efficient processes that we have looked at: capacity, transportation. Is the demography data really accurate? We don't have enough data to make this decision. Please put it off for another year. Work with the community. I laid out a whole timeline of processes you could follow with a very thorough district last meeting, forming a committee, getting a consultant, having that committee, a stakeholder committee, give you their input, and then taking it to the community, 6 community forums, Q&A dialogue, recording meetings and Q&A sessions. Please record your meetings. I'm sorry, but all the responses about not recording them, just go back to pride. That's all that is. That's not a good excuse. Please record meetings and let parents be involved in this decision. Put it off a year. Thank you.
Joel Trainer.
Good evening. I was called the other day and asked if I would help raise money so we could keep the school open. So I asked how much the bill was. Since I have been here, there have been multiple things done to try to help raise the money and supplement the revenue that y'all have coming in. I've never said that it's not difficult. I've talked to multiple other board members from other dioceses. They've all told me it's extremely difficult. That being said, you had to pay for tuition program. The question was, what was that going to do when that ended? Did anybody have a plan? We cut the buses. We're closing a school. And since that time, we've passed a bond to help our facilities. We've built press boxes, widescreen TVs, turf fields, bought some new buses, athletic facilities, and a swimming pool. My question is how much money is that returning us in regards to how much money we have spent? Currently, right now, we have $11 million in our bond program that we pay 3.5% on interest. Is that correct? That's not correct. Okay. Well, it costs about $1 million to put a turf field for a baseball field if you want to do it properly. So if we are paying 3.5% interest rate to save $50,000, it seems a little silly to me. My two questions I've had, and I've had these for the last 6 years. Why are we losing students? I know everybody doesn't respond, but is anybody actually picking the phone up and asking, why are you leaving our school district? I thought they were coming here in droves. And my second question is why are we losing teachers? Why do we have such a high turnover ratio with our employment in general? And then the third thing is this: if the actual cost to keep this school open for 1 year is $1.29 million, if we cut you a check for $1.29 million, will you leave the school open? You got to say one yes, right? Oh, I know that. I'm just hoping somebody would say yes. If your answer is yes, and you don't want to call me and you don't want to say anything right now, feel free to reach out to me directly. Okay? Thank you, guys.
Mr. Collins and board, that ends the public comments related to agenda items.
Stacy, and thank you everyone who shared your comments tonight. We greatly appreciate it. It's not always easy to come up and speak publicly like that, and so we always appreciate it. Okay, we're going to move on now to item number 7, and I think Dr. Womack is going to kick us off.
Good evening, board. Good evening, community. As Mr. Collins said, I do appreciate that you've come out on a Sunday evening to share your comments with the board. And really, as we look through the difficulty of operating and running a school district, there's a lot of factors that are included in that. As we looked at the considerations on there, one of our speakers talked about the difficulty in passing a TRE or a tax ratification election and bringing up our tax rate. Only a couple of years after that, the legislature met and changed that structure. So the tax rate that you approved was actually compressed. It's much lower than it is today. And really the part of our funding issue that we're facing for current year and next year has to do with that funding mechanism. It's called House Bill 3. It was passed in 2019 and it funds us on our enrollment and attendance, but it really looks to fund economically disadvantaged populations. And so as Lovejoy, most of you know that we have a very small economically disadvantaged population. We average around 3% or less a year in that particular group. Therefore, the way that the state funding has been written, it does not provide Lovejoy with the same revenue from the state that we've previously enjoyed. In fact, prior to 2019, we were $321 per student more than after 2019, after House Bill 3 was passed. So we received $300, and I may have misquoted that number, $331 difference. So we lost $331 per student after House Bill 3. Now, House Bill 3 isn't a bad bill for the state of Texas. It just didn't work out for Lovejoy to be able to continue the programs and the level of funding from the state that we had previously had. Additionally, the state funds districts that are called fast growth districts. And the way that they do that is they take the 25% of all of the school districts with the largest growth and they rank order them. And then the 25%, the top 25%, they get a fast growth allotment. Lovejoy has typically been on that list. Historically, we've been on the list since, gosh, about 15 years since I've been here. Unfortunately, we are no longer on that list. In fact, we're 8th below that line. That's a hit of $1 million by itself. And that started this school year. Our local revenue sources are down. And part of that, most of that's due to COVID. And hopefully that will rebound for next year. But it does put us in a difficult budget for current year, more so. And then, as was mentioned earlier, the potential legislation to repeal our ability to charge tuition. And I'm going to get into this a little bit deeper in a moment. But I know one of our speakers mentioned that that legislation, at least from the House perspective, they did not repeal that, which is good. However, in the Senate bill, it still remains. It's still being repealed in the Senate version. We won't know where that legislation comes out and probably until the end of May, which is when it'll go to conference committee between the Senate and the House. That's normal. That's a standard process that they've always done. It's not new. The House will have their version, the Senate will have their version, and then they'll meet in conference committee and debate it out. However, the decisions that the board needs to make need to occur well before conference committee. And then there's been some comments about the declining enrollment. We don't have declining enrollment K-12. Really, where we see our declining enrollment is only in K-4. We're still growing at the secondary level. In fact, some of the speakers tonight talked about they moved here and they have a middle school kid, but they have some younger students as well. And that's typically what we do see is parents that move in are typically moving in with some older secondary age children and more than not do not have K-4 students. We aren't seeing young families move in, and we are not seeing the same level of turnover on existing homes after students age out and the empty nester stay. Since 2015, there's been a decline on the number of homes that are being turned over or regenerated with younger families. And those are all realistic numbers. They're not made up or synthesized in some way to just meet a narrative that we're trying to give. They're the actual facts. And really, when you come down to it, in order to continue a strong school district, in order to maintain what you love about Lovejoy, that's really what this is about. And I know that we may differ in what our opinions are on how to achieve that, but I think the outcome that we all want is the same. And I really do believe that that outcome is what is in the best interest of all, and that's our kids. And I completely, wholeheartedly believe that. Now, how we get there may be a little bit different, but I do know this, and one of the speakers said this, that our parents are so important to that process. And you may not feel enfranchised. You probably feel disenfranchised through this process because of how quick it's been, how fast we've had to move to really prepare for next year's budget. And I'm sorry that we're having to do that. I'm sorry that we're taking the steps that are appropriate to secure the financial health of the district long term. I know from your seat it doesn't look like that. I do realize that we need our parents. We need you to be on board with us as a district as a whole, because that's what's in the best interest of the kids, right? Now, I say that only, and I'm not doing it tongue in cheek. I'm being very sincere and honest. We have to come together. Has this process done that? No, I get that. This process has been very limited in time and has required us to move very quickly. And I'm going to address some of that in a moment, why that's there. But we are currently in this era within the district of mistrust, apprehension, skepticism from our community. And we're not going to be successful if we continue with those divides. So we have to build some trust with you, and you have to build some trust with us. It's a two-way street. However, I get that we're in the driver's seat on this one, and we've not done our our best work to engage everyone to the level that we would like to. One parent emailed me, and I really appreciated the email because it really spoke to exactly what I'm talking about. When we did that TRE and we had some meetings we had them at all the campuses, we had the luxury of time to be able to go around and talk about why it was necessary or why we needed to take the next steps to pass a tax ratification election. If we had the same luxury of time on this one, I guarantee you that we would have done it a different way, a whole different process. One of the speakers, and I do appreciate it, recognized that at the end of February, we did have our superintendent depart the district. So it really left us in a very narrow window for the interim, myself, to step in and to begin the work with the board. Although we've already been working with the board, it wasn't new information, except that the legislation was new, or the potential legislation was new. And it did impact our overall budget development because we had anticipated expanding a tuition program in a way that we would have reaped additional benefits that we don't believe will happen at this point forward. But I do know this, and I'm confident in the board's leadership, that you're making decisions based on what you believe are truly in the best interest of our kiddos, all of our kiddos. And I know the question was asked, well, how many of you have elementary kids? When you're making your decisions as a board, when the administration makes a recommendation to the board, it's made on each kid. It's not made on whether or not I have an elementary kid. In fact, my two girls went through elementary here. In fact, Ryan, they went with your kids. And we love Lovejoy Elementary. My wife and I have blood, sweat, and tears at this campus. In fact, that playground that was out there, I helped build physically. It's not about the love as much as it is the financial health of the district long-term so that we can continue to provide the enriched excellence that we do to kids K-12 every day. And that's really where we've got to bring the community in with us and partner with us and hold that bond tighter than ever. When times get difficult, we tend to, it's kind of that whole process that you go through of first denial that you're having difficult times. And then second, you go through that process, well, it's their fault. And you start pointing fingers. But really, we need to get past those processes and move on to here's what we got to do to take care of kids. And here's where we need our parents to partner with us to help that happen. Even when we don't agree. I know it's frustrating. Listening to your comments, I hear the frustration in your voices. I hear the distrust in your voices. I know that you do mean the best and you're advocating for your kids, and I can appreciate that. But I do know that if we're not united moving forward as a community, as a school district, and with our parents, that the success of Lovejoy will not happen. And so with that, I am going to go through some additional slides with you, but the difficult decisions that have to be made, whether the board makes them tonight or makes them next week or the week after, they're still going to have to be made at some point to make us financially feasible to continue to operate and provide the level of services that you expect and that you want for each one of your kids. And that the obstacles that come before us, we're going to have to figure out a way together that we can overcome them. And so that's what our plan is to do with you. Now, Shay, if you'll flip one forward, this slide talks about the legislation and tuition, and I really want to address this. So House Bill 1525 has passed the House floor and it's been sent to the Senate. The companion bill to 1525 is Senate Bill 1536, and it's still pending. We do expect that the Senate's going to adopt the House version and amend it. And there's really two parts to tuition. And this is key. There's the part that's called a parent paid tuition, and then there's a part that is district paid tuition. And what is district paid tuition? When Lovejoy was a K-6 district, we used to send our students, as one of our speakers said this evening, we used to send our students to Allen. We paid Allen ISD to educate the 7th grade through 12th grade students because Lovejoy didn't provide those grades. So we paid tuition to Allen ISD to educate those students. Parent paid tuition is when a parent chooses, if the school district offers, B, a parent voluntarily chooses to pay tuition to that school district to attend. What's being rescinded and will most likely be rescinded by the Senate is the parent paid piece. That's where our school district currently operates, where we have folks outside the district that do not live in Lovejoy. They will not meet residency, that have to pay tuition to come to Lovejoy. And that's called parent paid tuition. That's the tuition part that we completely expect that the Senate will strike. However, when it gets to conference committee in late May, we have every intent to push that that not be rescinded, that stay in law, that we continue to be able to have parent paid tuition, so that the school district can choose on how we want to utilize that opportunity in the future. How did this impact our current budget development? As I said earlier, the tuition piece for this past year was about $1 million of actual tuition revenue that the district generated. As the board was going through budget development in January and February, part of the conversations was the expansion of that tuition program. And in terms of looking at even reducing the tuition fee to generate more opportunities for kids to come, and thereby a larger number, more tuition overall would be paid. On March the 12th, when both of these companion bills were filed, so that was on March 12th that they were filed, the board had to make a decision. And Shay, if you'll flip forward. The board had to make a decision about how they were going to recover from the $1 million loss of the current tuition fees, and then decide how would we move forward. So if there's a potential for those fees to go away, then what would be our decision? So by removing the tuition from our Lovejoy scholars, basically the impact's $1 million, but you also increase the number of students that you were willing to take into the program. We've been averaging around 100 students. You put a cap on that of 350. And then you told the administration, but let's budget for 265 students. And so that 265 students would generate roughly $2 million, a little over $2 million, which is over $1 million more than what we were getting in actual tuition from our students. So the impact of doing that is really being conservative with your budgeting, because we didn't want to get to the end of May and then have that pulled out from under us and not have that opportunity when we had already issued contracts. And so they're kind of interwoven together, our employee contracts with the whole budget process. And I know it seems illogical to a lot of folks, but we actually issue our contracts by state law. We issue contracts before the actual budget is approved. And I know that sounds weird. So 85% of our budget, more than 85% of our budget is tied up in people, in contracts with staff. And so if 85% of it has to be done by May 14th is your drop dead date, but you're not going to find out from the legislature if they're going to repeal tuition until the end of May. And then you don't even approve or adopt a final budget until the end of June. So really the May 14th day, or May 10th in this case, because that's when we will ask you to renew or non-renew employee contracts, that date really becomes your threshold. That date is the date that we have to get everyone that is going to be in the district under contract or not. If the board didn't take action, and I know I've mentioned this before, and so this isn't new for our board, but if the board doesn't take action, those contracts auto-renew. And again, that's state law. That's not something unique to Lovejoy. That's the way term contracts work under Chapter 21 of the Education Code. So when you look at this timeline of contracts, again, we found out the two bills, that one in the Senate and one in the House, on May the 12th would repeal tuition. We declared a programmatic change, or the need for program changes on the 25th, and I know one of our speakers mentioned that. We had a town hall on the 12th to try to answer any additional questions, receive questions. I think Dr. Van der Sar, we probably had over 200 questions, if not more, that we've tried to address and answer regarding those. You didn't take action last time. You tabled it on the 19th and set tonight's meeting to rediscuss it. So now we are down to 2 weeks to really to do a lot of work in the event that you move forward with the administration's recommendation. And that's applying a rank order criteria that's in board policy to those staff members that would be in an affected employment area, as well as holding individual meetings with them, which is respectful and the right thing to do. And then thirdly, notify our employees of open positions within the district and hopefully move them into those open positions so that they can continue their employment in Lovejoy. Then we have to bring the board before May 14th, we have to bring you their contracts to renew or non-renew. And we have to list those employees' names out on the agenda on those that we are recommending to non-renew. So that's the process that we have to go through. That's not an option. We have to do that. And then that gives us 4 days after May the 10th to physically, and again, this is written in law, to hand deliver that notification to our employees that are impacted. And so that's the process we have to go through. I know it's a very short timeline, but it's the timeline that we have to follow. So Shay, if you'll flip. There's been some conversation about, well, what about COVID relief and some COVID relief funds? And there were some funds that were sent out to the states back in the summer, right before school started in the state of Texas. They decided to take that $1.2 billion of federal stimulus money that was earmarked for elementary and secondary education and use that on the state's budget. And so Lovejoy actually did not receive any additional funding for COVID relief out of that summer amount. After the Biden administration came in, and I'm sure all of our public are aware, they passed some additional COVID relief opportunity, and it's about $18 billion for the state of Texas. We're still waiting, even though the money is in Austin, we're still waiting to hear how they plan to distribute that, if they plan to distribute that. But it is desperately needed money to offset the cost that the school district already has expended. So we've already expended the funds And it's part of the $3 million that we are deficit for current year. Out of the part, not all of that's COVID related, but a chunk of it is COVID related. So hopefully we'll get some replenish of those COVID funds. However, if we don't, then that's a $3.1 million hit to your fund balance. And your fund balance is what you use for cash flow. And Ms. Adams is going to talk about that a little bit more a little bit later. So if the board were to make a decision this evening, and I really wanted to throw this in here because I think this is important to understand, that if you were to choose to repurpose Lovejoy Elementary School and have Hart and Puster as K-4 campuses, we would have to redo the attendance zones. Right now we have 3 attendance zones. We have the Puster, Lovejoy, and Hart attendance zones. We'd have to redo the attendance zones. We would need to announce our campus administrators, and hopefully we would be able to do all the campus administrators later this week. On the attendance zones, we would want to ask our parents that have an interest to help participate in that and help set those up. Then if you look at number 4 up there, the campus administrators and the PTOs of all 3 campuses will help develop that transition plan and what that's going to look like, and how the transition would actually work if you chose to go this direction. And then as that is occurring, we're finalizing our campus staff lists. And what that means is, out of that early incentive that you gave or had the administration give on March 25th, we had about 35 teachers, K-4 teachers, that chose to take your early incentive. Was that K-4, Mr. Musers? No, K-12, sorry. K-12, 35 teachers. Really what that means is, and I think there's one of our littler speakers said earlier that she didn't want us to unemploy any of her teachers or anybody at this campus. As we sit here today, our preliminary review is that we're not going to lose any K-4 teachers that are currently on staff. In fact, we'll have enough openings to fill anyone that wants to stay in Lovejoy. They'll have a spot in Lovejoy, either still at the same grade level at one of those 2 K-4 campuses, or they'll have opportunities in other open positions that they are qualified for. So that's good news, that I really don't believe, as we are here this evening on our preliminary review, that we'll actually need to non-renew a teacher that can't fit into another position that we have, unless they choose not to. That's about the only other option that they would have. So that's good news. And then after the new campus admin and the new PTOs for each of those campuses all have an opportunity to build that transition plan, we'd want to share the plan and the timeline with the community as a whole, with the board as well. And then finally, on May the 10th, this is the list of other items that the board will still need to consider. And that's the contract renewals, as I've already mentioned, the elementary attendance zones, again, utilizing parent input on helping to draw those. Transition plans for our K-4 configuration. We wouldn't need your actual approval on that, but more of an update or review of that, which includes our principal assignments, our staff placements, utilizing our parents to help with the transition of those 2 new campuses, our special programs, including our special education staff and kids, and any opportunities to meet the teacher or to open house, anything that we can do that comes out of that transition with our parent planning committee that we can do to help really, as I said earlier, bring us back together and rebond as much as possible over the summer months. And so Then the last two items is transportation changes, any potential changes that may need to occur with transportation, including start and end times of school, and then any capital projects that we want to consider that would have an impact on our maintenance and operation budget for next year. And while I'm on that one, I don't think Ms. Adams has this built into her presentation, so I'll hit it real quick. One of the speakers was talking about how we have utilized some of our construction funds and to reduce our M&O cost. And just to remind the board and the community that there's two parts of your budget. There's the INS, the interest and sinking fund budget, and then there's the maintenance and operation budget. And the INS budget is used for capital improvements. You can't use any of those dollars in your INS to fund staff, pay utilities, to pay for supplies. That none of that can be done. Those funds can only be used for capital improvements, for construction, or those items associated are connected to construction, like furniture, fixtures, and equipment within those facilities. And so those, you can't use them to pay teachers or to fund anything that is outside of that construction or capital improvement side of it. And so I just want to be sure to clarify that so that it's not left hanging open. And so Ms. Adams, I'm going to ask you to pick up on the next slide.
Is my mic live? Okay. All right. So hopefully you can hear me okay. I have a little bit of a visual barrier and tonight I wasn't able to click from there and see what I was doing. So they've allowed me to click from my station here. So Dr. Womack, thank you for covering the budget timeline earlier. I really didn't realize he was going to do that until earlier tonight, so I built this in as well. Just for those of you who have followed the budget development closely, you know this is our 9th public meeting on budget for 21-22, and as you can see, we have at least 3 more to come before adopting the budget. But as he pointed out, I wanted to also point out that one of the most critical dates on that calendar is that May 10th date, because it sets so much of our budget in place, with over 85% of our general fund budget being comprised of personnel. So those decisions have to be made early. I want to walk through, and much of this is the same information. I know there's some familiar faces here as well. Thank you so much for your dedication to attending these meetings. I want to walk through some information that may be repetitive, but I'm going to look at it in a little bit different way with you, and make sure that that our board, who has to make decisions based around this information, to give them opportunities once we're done to really look at each one of the items that we have on the recommendation for the administration. And so I first want to just start with this full $6 million. Dr. Womack's walked through really the how that we've gotten there. It's a culmination of several things. That deficit comes from a multitude of factors, including the loss of the fast growth allotment, the reduction in the enrollment that's only partially related to COVID. It was just accelerated by COVID. We have less funding per student through House Bill 3, and as he corrected, it's $331 per student. We have less local income, which we are really hoping will rebound, and the potential loss of the parent-paid tuition program, as he explained. So as we start with that $6 million, I want to walk through each of the items on the recommendation of the administration to the board, so that you can see kind of the multifaceted way that we have approached this budget deficit. And so the first piece of that has already been discussed as well, is the decision the board made on the 25th, I believe, that drastically reduced the need to cut programs even deeper by filling those seats that were formerly reserved or filled by our resident students. So remembering that our funding is driven almost exclusively by our enrollment and attendance, almost 90%, 95% in fact, of that revenue is related to our number of students that are attending. So this potential expansion, or this expansion of our enrollment program, that limited application process, really will raise about $2.4 million at 300 students. Our cap is higher than that, but again, we're only budgeting on a lower number. That number, if you've been tracking and following us, had been 265 students previous to this presentation, and we've increased it to 300. And the reason for that is because the delta between one of our recommendations that we have changed is also 300,000. And so we had to make that up in some venue. And so this would net about $1.4 million over what we actually collected in our tuition or transfer program, our Lovejoy Scholars Program previously. But you can see that that number took that $6 million down to where we now are looking for $3.5 million to balance the budget. I want to clear up any confusion if I can, and some of this specifically is centered around questions that we received for the frequently asked questions, some emails that we received from our community, and even some from questions from our board. So to clear up confusion about how we estimate the revenues versus the actuals in just the student numbers, because again, those student numbers are what drive our funding, I put together this infographic. So there on the left side of it, you'll see the low demographic number for 2021 of 4473. And we adjusted that down by about 4% to make that relative to where we are this year, that we're tracking about 4% less than the low demography for 2021. And so the last thing that we want to do ever, regardless of this year's budget or any other budget, is to over project revenue just to balance a budget, because at the end of the year we're going to have to take those funds from fund balance if we miss a projection. And many people don't understand that the way that school district budgets work is that we estimate how many students are going to be here throughout the year, not only enroll, we have to staff on the enrollment, but we only are funded on their attendance. And so you get a lot of communication from your campuses, you realize that. So we have to base that projection on the knowns that we have. We've done that very, very well for many years based on the demography that we have and the historical attendance that we have. And so whenever we look at projecting for next year, that's exactly where it comes from. We ratcheted down below our low enrollment growth by the 4% that we're continuing to see in 2020. Oh, so sorry. Nobody wants to see my DIY on my bathrooms, huh? And so the next piece is that we increased the projection by 45 students, because as of February the 25th, when we were starting to deliver or receive some of the additional deficit information, that we received re-enrollment notifications from about 45 students. And so we included that revenue so as not to have to cut further into our programs. We included that revenue for those 45 students. We've also, and I mentioned this earlier, increased the budget, the budgeted revenue from 265 to 300. And so I wanted to make sure and walk through that so that you could see where we were with what we are estimating for our revenue and where those numbers come from. And then on the right side, really show you where we are tracking to date on those. So on the right side, you'll see that we have pre-registered, and PowerSchool is our software where the students, you probably are familiar with it. You may have had some forms and so forth that you've had to fill in there. So we have pre-registrations for 21-22 of 4,034 students. That ages up our students that are moving from kindergarten to first grade. It takes out ones that have notified us that they're moving out of the district. It includes, and some of the speakers mentioned this, it includes those people that are building houses or buying houses in the district. They go ahead and register their students. So any known piece that we know about, because parents have let us know, are included in that 4,034. However, there are 59 more parents who have picked up packets for a student who are 59 students are represented here who have not yet completed or turned that back in, but have indicated that they will return. They just are not yet returned and completed. And then we had, as of last week, 87 Lovejoy Scholars applications. And so with all of that compared to where our budgeted revenue is, with the assumption that those students do enroll, we still need about 194 more enrollments to meet our revenue projection. What I want to make sure is clear from this after I put this together is making sure that everyone understands, and especially the board, that you understand that 194 students to meet our enrollment projection. It doesn't matter if they are resident students or if they are part of the 300 transfer applications, the limited enrollment transfer. In fact, we really prefer that there are residents, because all that will do is decrease the number of transfers that we receive. And so the funding is the same for either student. So it's 194 net students. Does that make sense? Okay. So I appreciate you kind of walking that through with me. I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on that. And so the 45, if you recall, the 45 students that is in that center section, the increase by re-enrolls, that information is reflected here as 44 ADA. So that's the average daily attendance. We staff on the enrollment, we're funded on average daily attendance. And so sometimes we get people that are saying, well, y'all's numbers aren't even the same whenever you look from presentation to presentation. You're almost always going to see me present from an average daily attendance standpoint because that's where our money comes from. You're almost always going to see seats in this classroom or teachers that we're providing, staffing that we're providing enrollment numbers from other people on the staff. So I wanted to make sure that I share the why behind that. So as that deficit for 21-22 continued to grow, our enrollment for the re-enrollment for the spring gave us the confidence to be consistent with our messaging. We didn't want to adjust the top line and then that confuse everyone. So we just adjusted that by that 44 ADA. So that's baked into the balancing recommendation package that the administration is presenting for you tonight. I just wanted to articulate that piece a little better. So we still have 3.2 million to go. And so the next item that we have there is the $75,000 from the One Heart, One Lovejoy from the current level of that program. We are so fortunate that our community is generous and so are our employees. So between our employee deductions and our community generosity, this is separate and apart from the current community efforts, which we are so appreciative of as well for the other programs. So that $75,000 is an increase in revenue that we had not budgeted on prior to this. So that leaves us with about 3.1 million to go. The next item I went ahead and put on here as a check mark and confident, although it is on your agenda for tonight as a reduction in force. But upon the exit of our former superintendent and amidst the deep deficit that was partially due to reduced enrollment, the board directed the administration to significantly reduce the positions in the central administration. We have a recommendation which will reduce that by 11 positions or 16% of those positions in the red building. None of those duties will be eliminated, but they will rather be absorbed by the staff that remain. And so that $850,000 reduction would bring us to $2.2 million to go. Just to kind of reiterate that, we've shared this in a previous presentation, but I still hear comments and receive questions. So these are just the program areas in the central support positions that I listed with those 11, in addition to some professional development budget that we will be eliminating and reducing. And so the next item is the item that most of our speakers were here tonight and on the previous two nights concerning. Our recommendation, because one of our other directions from the board was to right size the staffing for our district to reflect the reduction in students. That is primarily at the elementary level. So I want to make sure here that I am very clear about this piece because there have been a lot of conversations. There was even a Dallas Morning News article covering this, that there has been some confusion that the current year's draw on fund balance, the COVID-related expenses, or the tuition program that Dr. Womack spoke about earlier are related to the recommendation to repurpose the elementary. They're really not related. This is due to an inefficiency. It's due to our direction to right size the district to the appropriate number of staff for the students that we're serving so that we are using those taxpayer dollars prudently and being good fiscal stewards. So they're separate and apart, the pieces of that are. With this recommendation, should the board choose to move forward with that, and we'll talk a little more about the specifics behind that, we would recommend 2 K-4 campuses after discussion of a more efficient model that would be 2 campuses that served kindergarten through 2nd grade and 1 that served 3rd through 4th grade. That is not our recommendation tonight. I also wanted to make sure, and maybe we should wait until the end, but I want to make sure that everyone understands too that the reading interventionist and the change into our reading academy style that Mr. Musers is able to address that, because just as our special education or our reading student, students that need reading intervention, none of our services for any of our students will change regardless of which building that they're sitting in. And so none of our recommendations would include a reduction in services to our students. So if the board chose to go with this recommendation, then we still have about $1 million to go. But just as a reminder, most of you are already very aware of what our structure looks like today in the 3 elementary, pre-K through 4 and so forth. The recommendation would reduce those 10 buildings. And well, this slide actually reflects the percentage of utilization. We've shared this in the past. This is just a repeat slide that we've inserted here so that we could show you the percentages in 21-22 of the enrollment that we have and the 60% average utilization among the 3. But in this building, 54%, at Hart 66%, and at Puster 59%. We've covered this again in the past, but I think it warrants covering again, that we even looked 5 years onto the future enrollment to make sure that it wasn't a short-sighted recommendation. 5 years from now, it looks like a 62% average utilization, and our that's based on low utilization. But we also went and said, hey, what if we do rebound and we get back up to moderate growth utilization? We would still be at 66% of that. So again, our recommendation is that we would have a cost savings of $1.2 million by making Hart Elementary and Puster Elementary our K-4 elementaries and converting Lovejoy Elementary into an early childhood center that would also house some of those district-wide services. It is not the most efficient financial decision as far as the financial health. You know, again, we've talked about that, but I think someone put it really well earlier when they said the logistical health that needed to be considered as well. And so considering the lack of thoroughfares that we have and the overall health of the district, besides just the financial, there's about a $300,000 delta between what would be the most efficient and what the structure that we're recommending. And that goes back to, if you'll remember, the 265 student budget versus the 300. There's about a $300,000 delta in there too, give or take $8,000. So we still have about $568,000 to go after we do some restructuring in our library support and secondary efficiency pieces. We've discussed this before as well, but we would recommend that our library support, which currently is structured with 1 librarian on each campus, that we would convert that to have 4 library media specialists, and that would cover all 5 campuses, and 2 library tech aides. So there would be someone in the library on all campuses at all times, but 2 campuses would share a librarian, and there would be a rotation schedule. So again, services would not change in that structure. And this is an area that we have included since the beginning of our conversation based on some of the research that we looked in other districts, and that was an additional add. You know, there's been a lot of conversation, especially in comments, about budget cuts that we've made in the past. And one of the budget cuts that we made in the past was so that we could add around an $800,000 security program that we are so grateful as an administration for. We love these staff members. We love the services that they provide for us. And none of these recommendations are easy for us to recommend. We have included it here. It is an area that we would like to discuss further with the board as we move toward the end of this presentation. They do not fall under the same Chapter 21 contracts such as teachers, and so you do not have to make a decision on this tonight. You could delay this decision. I know there's some efforts in the community to help fund some security positions, and we can talk about that at a little later time. But I can assure you that no one appreciates those guys as much, guys and ladies as much as we do. And so we would love to find a way to include our security staffing, maybe not at the current level that we have it, but the current level we have right now budgeted is 1 on each campus and then 2 at our high school, which is a very large campus. And so the potential structure that we have here for saving $350,000 would reduce that to 3 officers. And you can see there just an example of how that might be structured. But there is also the potential of structuring it to where we have 5 officers. That would add back about $180,000, $160,000 to the budget if that were funded in some other manner, potentially by donations. To add back to 6 officers when we would have two at the high school in that scenario would cost about $240,000. And so again, we'll talk more about that whenever we get to a discussion point. And then the final recommendation that we have on here, and I've just kind of built this so that you can see the dial on the $6 million wheel over there, that this assumes that all regular education riders would pay a fee of $350 as some of our riders pay now. Special education transportation would not be affected, changed, or impacted and would not be charged a fee. So this would leave us with about $67,800 to go. There have been discussions, and we'll look again just to share information and be completely transparent about where some of the money is being spent. We have about it's actually $660,000 that we spend on the transportation for regular education. So a total elimination of that program, which some districts have considered, not all, but some have considered moving those funds into an educational program because it serves only around 10% of our students. But what we have recommended and what we've built in here would add an additional $150,000 of revenue to help offset that $661,000 to move forward. And then I think I said final earlier, but I forgot about this one little one, is that if you move forward with some of the recommendations that the board, that the administration will bring to you in the May meeting, those funds that are spent in the bond program for facilities that are needed and that are appropriate to be spent from the bond program, really a perk to that is that it shifts and cost savings some of the operations budget that we're spending now. So for instance, we won't water a turf field, and right now we're paying for watering field. If we have lighting, I'm sorry. So should you decide to move forward with some of those, there's a very small operational savings, and that's what's reflected here because those are separate funds and they're separate tax rates. They always have been, and that would continue to be. So the decision is separate, and it comes from a separate completely pot of money if you choose to go forward with those, but it does include some savings on your general fund side. And so this is the same information, just in the same graph that you've seen this on each presentation. We try to keep those as familiar as possible. We want to make sure that you follow all the information that we have. We try not to change that top line. That's the reason that we add the 45 as a line item instead of just reducing the $6 million, because then there's money moving continually. And although we can see that and work in the net, we want to make sure that you have that information. So one thing before I flip to the next one that I wanted to share with you is on the fund balance, because I know there's been some conversation around that. We spent quite a bit of time on that last meeting. So the current year, when we ended last year, when we ended 1920, for the current 2021 school year, we have about $9.3 million in fund balance. That is the district's, if you will, savings account. It's what we use for cash flow to operate the district while we are not receiving payments of property taxes or state funding. And so because we have about a $3 million payroll every month, and we make payroll every month, we have to cash flow that until the taxpayers start paying their property taxes in December. And so we get a small amount of state funding, and that state funding comes in the fall to help us with that. But a draw of $3 million off of that $9 million down to $6 million will make it a very difficult time to maneuver. And it's why it's even more important that we're reducing the budget, the overall budget, so that we can continue to cash flow the operations of the district. Sorry about that. So I want to flip over a bit to that same chart. Well, hang with me for just a minute. There we go. And share with you the overall recommendation of the administration. These are the same items that I just went one by one, but are the limited application enrollment, which you've already approved. I put those things in gray that I feel are already approved and didn't really necessarily require your a board action item. The one for $850,000 will be required for you to have an action item, but we went ahead and included that in gray. This is where the most efficient number would be the $1.5 million, but our recommendation is the 1.2 million. The change in the library support, the change in the security staffing potentially, and the $150,000 generation of $350 fees, and the $50,000 that would come from the savings that we would have on capital projects such as lighting savings, water, and so forth. That would reach us within around $17,000 or just a fraction of a percent in a comparison to a $40 million plus budget. So I share this with you because I would also entertain from the board if you wanted me to leave these top 4 grayed out, if you wanted me to, I hate to say play with because we're not playing with budgets, but if you wanted me to illustrate any different scenarios that we have talked about and considered. We've talked a great deal over years, not just this year, over years about the extracurricular fee that would generate about $565,000. That is based on the approval that you had about 2 years ago, based on the fee structure of $150 for 7th grade, $250 for 8th grade, and $350 for a high school student. So those are projections based on those fee structures. We have talked about, I misquoted myself, at $668,000 instead of $661,000 on transportation, on the elimination of that. And so should the board want me to move any of these numbers around, I'm happy to do that for illustration purposes. But again, the recommendation of the administration includes those things that we had in the presentation. I see that Mr. Musers has made his way over to the podium. Would you share with us 2 specific things, Dennis, about the reduction in force, especially at the K-4 level, how those positions would be reallocated, and then following that, the reading intervention services?
Absolutely. So as Shay mentioned, March 25th was not only a decision about expanding our limited application transfers and making some adjustments to our Lovejoy Scholars Program to institute of 350 student cap. But on that night, the board also had the foresight and really was tremendously helpful in terms of this entire process, which has been obviously gut-wrenching and challenging for all of us, but to look for savings within our budget to address our $6 million shortfall for the upcoming school year, passed the incentive, early notification incentive for our staff members who had already have plans to not return to Lovejoy for whatever reasons that could be, transfer of a spouse, retirement, no longer going to stay in education, looking at a career change. And so we had 35 teachers, as Dr. Womack mentioned, take advantage of that incentive. And with those resignations, K-12, and then specifically in our K-4 program, we have more than enough positions for all of our teachers that will be potentially impacted by a reduction in force. In fact, based on our projected enrollment and staffing models for 2 K-4 campuses, we anticipate we'll have 4 positions open as job postings for teachers to apply for who would be joining the school district. So again, I think that's an important item to continue to keep in mind is this reduction in force is about reduction in positions, not reduction in people. And so all of our people are valued. They have been successfully vetted through our strenuous selection process. And we invest in our team members, and we don't want to lose any of them. Unfortunately, the demographics and all of the enrollment at this point is telling us we absolutely won't. In fact, we'll be adding 3 or 4 new members to the team in grades K through 4. Also, in terms of reading intervention, we've had 1 reading intervention teacher at each elementary school. A few sessions ago, the state passed a requirement for all K through 3 teachers to attend specific training in the Texas Reading Academies. In those year-long trainings, they're they're really upping their skills in terms of how to intervene with all students to meet the needs of all students, regardless of their early literacy challenges or strengths. And so our teachers will be, all of our K through 2 teachers this upcoming year will be participating in that training. So what we've done is with our 3 reading intervention teachers, one of our 3 teachers, reading intervention teachers, was trained by the state, or by the region, to become a cohort leader for the Texas Reading Academy's training. So she'll actually be leading all of her K2 peers to really give them the knowledge and skills that she has as a reading intervention teacher, and support that with our scheduling at each campus to provide intervention time for those students in need. And our 2 teachers that were also reading intervention teachers, one has resigned, actually retired, and the second one has expressed an interest in a classroom teaching position, and we're looking forward to placing her in a first grade classroom. And so in addition to building capacity in all K through 2 teachers, the specific curriculum that our reading intervention teachers have been utilizing, the district owns that curriculum. It's very expensive. It's LLI. It's about $15,000 per campus. That's available as a resource that we own on each campus. And we're going to actually expand the training in that curriculum to other grade level teachers. And so, for example, at Hart, the 4th grade teachers this past year had been trained in how to deliver that curriculum to support students that had reading challenges. And so I think that's just another great internal example of we own the resource, we have the capacity to train into our staff, and that's just another excellent tool that they'll add to their tool belt to support all of our students. And again, I think as Shay mentioned, none of us in good conscience could ever recommend a loss of a program that we know benefits so many students. And so what we've done through our work with the budget shortfall is to look for other flexible ways to still provide that very important service to our students.
Go ahead.
Talk about that for a minute. What did we draw our fund balance down by at our highest point this year, cash flow was?
I'm trying to think what month it was, but in November, we've probably drawn it down to about $3 million.
Down to 3 from 9?
Yes,
So 6 million.
yes. 7, but I'm doing that from memory, but it's in the $3 million range. And that really just comes from our monthly payroll is our biggest draw of expense because payroll is the largest piece of our budget. So that's around $3 million a month. And so from July, when we start making payroll in a new fiscal year through December, we're paying payroll from our cash in our checking account or our cash in our investment accounts in general fund, which is our fund balance, plus some limited state funding that we receive. The state sets us up, they realize that, and so they have us on a cycle as a Chapter 48 district or 49 district that's property wealthy. They have us on a cycle to where we're front loaded with our state payments, but our state payments are only about $6 million. So in addition to our fund balance, the state's payments come in the fall, and those are what cash flow us until we start collecting property taxes.
On the utilization of the elementaries as we project out for a 5-year period.
This one?
I know we saw, I think our last meeting, you actually showed the projections year by year per school. Do we have that? Or
To
the
that,
reduction?
yeah, I'll have to pull that up from my previous.
Our test on our current enrollment versus what it could trend to. There was a couple other numbers I think you illustrated. think there was a 5-year number you gave us? Yeah. So in 5 years, our highest point in 5 years based on which growth model? And we're trending below low currently,
Below low.
6%. Am I reading that right?
66% is if we went up to moderate,
Okay.
if our growth accelerated to moderate.
Yeah. The bottom is 10-year or 5-year?
The bottom is 10-year. It
10 years.
goes to 2029.
And that's the highest point in that time? Oh, that's the average. Okay. About special education. So I think important is not only that we keep those folks, but we keep those folks with the kids they're currently serving. So can you speak to, I know we haven't made this decision, obviously. Maybe we're not prepared to answer that fully. But how do we feel about the ability to protect that relationship that those kids have with those teachers?
Familiar staff with students, and so once a decision is made, we will look at each individual student's plan. It lets us know really what staffing needs to look like, depending on each campus, if that's the direction that the work goes in. And then really working, as Dr. Womack talked about, transition plans with the families and the students team, and there's going to be multiple staff members that work with each student to make sure that we have smooth transitions through it. Our goal is to keep familiar staff with students.
In the community, really with concerns around overcrowding. So if we go to 2 campuses, the overcrowding prospect, and then also I think may have been Amy Russell had asked around if we overcrowd, will we put ourselves in a position to need to reopen elementary school? Can you walk through just the thinking there? Obviously, we're seeing what this looks like, but when you put everybody, if you put everybody on 2 campuses, what does that look like?
Sure. So really, there's
Back to last week's presentation and try to pull that up while you're speaking.
Sure.
Okay.
So really there's 2 parts, and here's the reality that we live in, that our 4th grade class is much larger than our kinder class. And so as the 4th graders move out into Sloan Creek, we're actually bringing in a smaller group of kids into the facility. Now, do we expect those numbers to grow some during their time at their elementary school? Absolutely, those will grow some, but they're not significant. There's not a large growth there. In fact, last year, but prior to COVID, we had about 190 to 200 students that were in kinder. This year, we're at 178. At 1st grade, we're at 201 students at all 3 campuses, 201 students at 1st grade. At 2nd grade, we are see a bigger increase because we had a much larger class when these kids were kinder of 267. So as those bigger classes matriculate through and move on to Sloan, we're seeing a smaller group that's filling in behind them. And so we'll continue to see that. If you look up at the screen, this will show you where our current enrollment is at each of the 3 campuses in our K through 4 program. And then if we take that same information for the low demography and look at 5 years and 10 years out, you can see that reduction over time due to the younger families or families, maybe even, I don't know if younger or middle-aged families or however you want to term that, just lower kids in the lower grade levels aren't coming at the same rate that they have prior. And a large portion, this is a great slide right here, because it really shows that decline of our K-4 enrollment over that time period of 10 years. And you can see it there. And most of that is really due to the price point of the homes that we have here in the district, we no longer, because we're already 95% built out, or I'm sure it's even a little higher than that now. We used to depend on new homes to provide new kids. So we saw a larger amount of growth in the district in terms of enrollment from new housing development. But we're not seeing that any longer because of the being built out. There's not as many new homes going up. Sure, we have some. There's some up in the Puster zone and some down in the Hart zone. But overall, the number of new homes has diminished. And therefore, it's really the number of students that we generate, and especially in the K-4 program, that we generate from existing homes and the flipping of homes. And as I shared earlier, with since 2015, those number of kiddos that are in the flipped homes at K-4 has decreased over time, as well as the number of empty nesters moving out. I think that at some point they may choose to move, but since 2015, there's been a decline of empty nesters that are actually choosing to put their property on the market and sell and move to somewhere else for whatever reason. That's what the data shows. And if you look up here for the past 10 years, so looking at a 10-year in the past, you can see how our secondary enrollment has increased inversely related to our K-4 enrollment as it has decreased. And so really as those groups have grown at the secondary level, we're seeing the same level of decline in our K-4. So in January of 2020, the demographer told us at that time that around 2023 to 2025, the conversation will be around that decline and whether or not you need to close a school. I think, as Miss Adams brought earlier, that COVID may have accelerated that. I do know that the property values have accelerated that. We're expecting another 5% increase in property values in Lovejoy for next year, for the coming year. That's preliminarily where the number is. So 5% on top of where we are today. If you take a look at the tax rolls of those, any home in the district that was here 5 years ago and compare it to where we are now, you're going to see a significant increase in the value of that home. And so as those values increase, we are seeing a smaller number of K-4 students coming out of those same homes as they enroll for school. So that's the reality. Now, if we were to, for whatever reason, let's say, oh, God forbid that there was a bubble bust and people were upside down in their homes here. I'm not suggesting that would ever happen, but I'm just saying if something dramatic like that occurred, could we see an increase in our K-4 enrollment? I guess it would be possible. If you could forecast that out, that'd be great. But I couldn't have forecasted in January of 2020 that we would be talking about a larger decline in our K-4 enrollment than what we were projecting already. So worst case scenario, Mr. Collins, to your point, we do have some capacity above our, what we call our functional capacity of our buildings to rise above that. It would be more temporary than long-term. If we had to, we could always move our kinder classes here to our early childhood center. That's what a lot of school districts do. They'll have a pre-K, K campus. That would probably never happen because I don't see our numbers increasing above the capacity we have for our two elementary campuses.
Question, would we be having a consolidation conversation if there wasn't a shortfall?
We would, because of the enrollment down decrease. Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit, we've had several suggestions around adding pre-K, and I think you even heard it tonight, adding pre-K to each campus to try to bolster size-wise. And then if we did a great job and got pre-K numbers up, so talk about what that would look like, trying to offer pre-K at all 3 campuses.
It's very similar to the utilization of our buildings that we were showing just a moment ago. When you spread out your pre-K across 3 facilities, it's less efficient than having it at 1 facility. And so think of it like this. If we had 1 pre-K at each of the 3 elementary schools today, and let's say that they averaged around 12 students. So that would give you a total of 36 students at all 3. And whether it's 18 at one and 10 at another and 5 at another, whatever the math is, but let's say we average around 12 for all 3 campuses. So that 36, we could, that's in 3 classrooms. If we had it at 1 site, we'd really only need 2 classrooms for 36 students. And so the inefficiency comes to having it at an additional site. That's why the K through 2 model and 3-4 model is more efficient than having 2 K4 campuses. It's for the same exact reason, is that the overhead that you have for the empty seats that that you would utilize, you're spreading those empty seats across multiple sites, just like we are today. And so by consolidating those empty seats down to either 2 buildings or even 1 building, then you have less empty seats available, and therefore you're more efficient.
Can you talk about transportation? So we've heard also a lot around transportation studies, one being a decade ago, the realities of today, maybe just in context, even busing, just help us understand and provide a little clarity on transportation in your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do provide transportation today. And as Ms. Adams presented earlier on this slide, that we spend over $650,000 to provide regular ed transportation to about 10%, roughly 10% of our student population. If you did the math on that, to actually charge the fee that we should be charging if we wanted to break even or be neutral on our transportation costs, you're looking at almost $1,000 per student per year. So you subsidize that today. We started the program a year ago of actually charging a fee to those families that live closer to their campuses of $350, and it can be divided out by semester of $175 a semester. And so the thinking here is that if you were to expand that out to $350 to all, so everyone would pay a portion. Again, you're still subsidizing the overall cost of transportation, but by expanding that out $350 to all riders, that everyone has an equal opportunity to participate and pay their fee to be a part of it. We are estimating that that's going to offset your cost by about $150,000 total in revenue from those fees. And so I think that those families that have to utilize transportation, that will still have that capability or that option for them by the fee opportunity. There are districts, as Ms. Adams brought forth earlier, that have either considered cutting transportation, have cut transportation. Some only offer transportation to those that live within or outside of 2 miles of their campus. There are many facets to how they provide it. Some do it just like, well, not exactly like us, but have these distance limitations. Some are by the measurement on the public road to as a crow flies scenario. I do know that the amount of increase in traffic in the community is large. It's been heavy, but you're 95% built out at the same time. So as that increased traffic we're seeing are maybe not all Lovejoy folks. They're traveling through Lovejoy to get to one side or the other, which is reasonable. You would expect that because these are the roads that they would have to utilize to get there. So if you live in the McKinney ISD on the east side of our boundaries, then you're most definitely driving through Lovejoy ISD to reach wherever your campus might be. It's interesting. One of your speakers tonight talked about serving those areas closest to us or closest to your border. You know, we started the transfer program in 2013. In that time, we don't have any kids that come from any of our bordering neighborhoods. As of this past year, there has been 0 that actually attended school that lived in one of those bordering neighborhoods, or even a split neighborhood for that matter. So that's interesting, given that they've got the opportunity or had an opportunity to attend. However, the current transfer program does allow for anyone from anywhere to participate. And really, if you live anywhere in the town of Fairview or the city of Lucas, even outside of the district boundaries, you have an opportunity to apply. Even in those applications, we're only getting a small fraction that are coming out of the K4 area. We've shared those numbers with the board. Shay showed you 87 transfers applications earlier on her slide. Of those 87, I think there were, I want to give you a wrong number, so let me look real quick. Of those 87, 35 were at K4, but 19 of those are at kinder, which is where we would expect them to be. We only had 11 kids out of that 87 that are at second, third, or fourth grade because of the same concept of they're already ingrained where they're at. So from a transportation perspective, we're probably not going to see a large influx of transfers in the lower grade levels, especially in the second, third, fourth, and really even first. We will at the kinder level. I think they're going to come and be on the front end of entering the district and then want to stay because now they're connected. They've built relationships in here. So I think we'll see some additional traffic from that opportunity. But at the secondary level, primarily we're seeing 23 kids at the high school, only 9 students right now at the middle school, and 20 students at the 5th and 6th grade. So it's very interesting just how they've come out. All of this has been word of mouth up to this point. I think that as we begin marketing a little bit further with our transfer or Lovejoy Scholars Program, we'll see these numbers increase. And then they go through our rigorous process of looking at their attendance, their discipline, and their academics to make sure that they're a good fit for the rigor of the Lovejoy education. And so I know that's kind of a long ways around, but I think the transfers will impact our overall transportation within the district. We don't provide transportation, obviously, outside the district. We attempt to provide it where needed within the district.
I had a question. You were talking about just to kind of tag along the fees. So some have suggested this past week about ways to save the safety and security program. Can you explain the feasibility of a potential fee for safety and security?
Sure. So there's really, there's one law that we all have to follow in the state of Texas and really in the nation, and that's to provide a free and public education to our kids. And when you charge a fee, a mandatory fee, then you fail that test of providing a free and appropriate education. So we wouldn't have you don't have the authority as a school board, we don't have the authority as a district to charge a mandatory fee for attendance. But we do have the authority for anything that's voluntary. So that's why extracurricular fee is possible, because students do not have to participate in extracurricular opportunities to get a free and appropriate education, public education. But anything like a supply fee, a security fee, anything that a student would or a parent would have to pay to enroll a child into the district that's not a voluntary fee would not pass that test.
That answers the question. We cannot charge a fee for that, so we're going to need to find a different way if indeed we want to preserve the one-to-one model.
If you wanted to charge a fee, it would have to be voluntary.
Got it. Thank you.
So we looked at the slides with 60% average utilization in our K through 4 campuses at present, projected to 62% 5 years from now, and 66% 10 years from now. Have we looked at what the administration's proposal of going to two K through 4s would do to utilization rates at those campuses?
So and I think we do have, or I thought we had that on it, that right there, that's it. We looked at it at the K2, 3, 4, but I think that if you're splitting the kids out, and again, it's going to depend on where the attendance line is drawn between the two, you're going to end up somewhere in that mid 80s at the campuses, at both of those campuses. Now, it might fluctuate a little bit depending on one neighborhood going north or one neighborhood going south, but it's going to be somewhere in that mid to high 80 level. And again, that's year one. And so year two, as we continue our decline in our K-4 enrollment, that number is going to come down a little bit, but shouldn't go below 60% out in the, even looking out 10 years.
Administration's proposal of 2 K-4s, aging everyone a year forward in the modeling that you've done, looking at potential new incoming kindergarten classes, et cetera. Will there still be open seats to fill in the 2 K through 4 model?
Yes, sir. That's a great question too, because elementary is one of the harder areas to kind of wrap people's minds around the idea of being full and having empty seats. And I used to call it the 90% rule, that if we could hit 90% of utilization on a campus, that we still have empty seats in that model. Because if you think about it, if you have 19 kids, let's say on average, and let's say we have 5 sections per grade level. So 5 times 5, 25, or let's use 6, I'm sorry. 6 times 5 is 30. So we have 30 total sections, 6 at each grade level, 6 kinder, 6 first, 6 second, 6 third, and 6 fourth. And let's say we're averaging around 19 students per class. You're going to, the building, every classroom is being used, you're going to feel full with that. But if you take those 30 classrooms, and so and the cap is 22 students per classroom, so you got 19, 20, 21, 22, 3, only 3 open seats per room, but multiply that by the 30 classrooms. Well, that's how many empty seats you have, that 90-ish total seats. That makes sense? So even though it may appear that you're full because you're utilizing every room, you're always going to have some empty seats. Now, we do that on purpose in terms of we want to make sure that when we have a resident that moves in October, that we have a seat for that child in there. So we're never going to be 100% full, but it's not uncommon for us, even this year and past years, to fill all of the seats that we have at a particular campus and then transfer any additional students that live in that attendance zone to another campus that we have empty seats. That's because of efficiency, so that we don't have to add another teacher mid-year, split classrooms on that campus where you already have teacher-student relationships built, so to make a new classroom. And so that's the realities of dealing with a what I call the 90% rule at our elementaries. Now, the problem with that is we couldn't go down to 5 sections with 19 kids per room. So if you try to take that same number of 19 and multiply it by 6 and then divide that by only 5 rooms, you're going to have more than 22 students. So that's kind of the reality of it.
A follow-up to that, it just popped into my head. I know right now, with the way we are structured, sometimes a grade is full. So you live in the heart zone, but you're coming to Lovejoy because it's full. So have y'all looked at what that might look like with the 2 K through 4s, or does that come into play when you look at where the dividing line is going to be? I guess it's sort of a double question, sorry.
Line is important because we don't want to overfill any one campus more than another. So we want to try to be somewhat even, and knowing that Puster has a little bit of a higher capacity than Hart, if we err on the side of Puster having a few more kids than Hart, that would be a good thing in terms of just capacity wise. And then when we look at the number of sections that we have per grade level, we again, it comes down to that efficiency piece of those 5 teachers. If we did a K2, 3, 4, then we're 5 teachers. We could reduce by 5 teachers, about 1 per grade level, because now you're consolidating all of the empty seats onto one site. When we do the 2K4s, we will have empty seats at both sites that we will keep a portion of those for resident kids that move in during the year. And then any of the others we'll utilize for transfers, assuming we get some in the K4 program. It looks like our area that is the lightest, our kinder, that's where we're getting the most applications, which is a good thing because that will help fill some of those kinder rooms, and that we would be have the availability and the seating capacity for them to matriculate all the way through.
So matriculate all the way through, that's a good point, and it raises a question I have, is because, you know, when we were looking at transfers, and I know that so far at least the demand is not there in the K, in the 2, 3, and 4 grades. We're seeing demand at K, a little bit at first, and you said only 11 students? 11. In second, third, 2 through 4? Okay. When we discussed the transfer policy revisions and we talked about a cap, would it be, in a hypothetical scenario, if we added 300 K through 4 students in transfers, which doesn't seem likely given the demand we've seen so far, but if we were to do that, would that cause bottlenecks or cause problems as they matriculate through the system, particularly at Sloan Creek or Willow?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, is the short answer. So even though we've had some transfer applications for our 5th and 6th grade, if we were to introduce a larger class at, let's say, next year's 4th grade, and if that class were sized larger than what the current 6th grade class is, or next year's 6th grade class would be, then the current 4th graders may not fit. So that is absolutely something that we have to map out ahead of time, which we've done, and can provide that data and that mapping of, as our resident kids increase, as Shay mentioned earlier, the number of transfers that we would actually be able to take will decrease because of exactly what you're talking about. We can't subscribe to students at the K-4 level, especially transfer students at the K-4 level, that we're not going to be able to process through our 5th and 6th grade and 7th and 8th grade. Really, Sloan is not as significant in that bottleneck as your 7th and 8th grade is, because we typically see a larger growth in the 7th and 8th grade than we do in our 5-6 program. We need to make sure that we're not introducing too many kids in K through 6 that we're not going to be able to get through that 7-8 side. So the 7-8 is really where the main bottleneck, or where we review the total number of students. And just speaking of that, I know there's been some questions about, well, why don't you move the 5th grade back down to the K through 4 campuses like you used to have them back before 2013? And we've looked at that, and absolutely, there's enough room at the elementaries to move our 5th grade down into the 3 elementary schools. And then all you're doing then is moving your inefficiency to Sloan Creek, right? Well, then why not move your 7th grade over to Sloan and now have a 6th and 7th grade campus? Well, we could absolutely do that. There's enough room at Sloan Creek to make that happen. But now what you're doing is you're going to double your cost on providing the same extracurriculars that you have at Willow Springs for your 7th graders to Sloan Creek. So now we're going to have the duplicates of our coaching staff, our fine arts staff at 2 campuses. And there's not enough 8th graders. You're just moving the inefficiency to the Willow Springs at that point. Well, why not move your 9th grade down and have them share? So have an 8th and 9th grade campus. Well, that's where we literally can't do that. And the problem is our 9th grade class tends to be one of our largest classes because that's where kids tend to move in the most, is in that 9th grade area. We don't have enough capacity at Willow Springs to fit the 8th and 9th grade together. Even we wouldn't have enough capacity today, and even looking out and projecting out with the demographers numbers, there still wouldn't be enough capacity to do that. Additionally, just because you are certified to teach 6th through 8th grade, you're not always certified to teach high school age kids. So now where we share our 7th and 8th grade teachers across the 7th and 8th grade, those same teachers wouldn't be able to potentially teach a 9th grade student, and vice versa. 9th grade teachers may not be able to teach 7th and 8th graders. I know it seems illogical that, well, they're just 1 year apart in age or 1 year apart grade level. Well, that's not how the state certifications work. You have to be certified for that particular grade area to be able to teach in that area.
So I have a question going back to time. And I appreciate you acknowledging that this is really tough in a shortened timeline. Can you address that a little bit more, maybe you or Shay, the margin of if we were to wait a year, what that would look like for our funds?
Yeah. So I don't mind beginning, and then Shay, you can jump in from the finance standpoint. Really, the waiting a year will drain your fund balance further than what you currently have the capacity to do. Unfortunately, and it wasn't at fault of anyone on the board, the administration, our parents. It's not anyone's fault that COVID hit, right? I mean, I can't blame you, and you can't blame me for COVID. But the COVID expenses that we've had and the lack of enrollment that I think that COVID has helped accelerate, those expenses, you will have a hit in your fund balance of about $3 million this year. We know that. We hope to recover some of that from the state. We hope. Well, hope's not the best strategy in the world, and they've been sitting on those funds for almost a month now for whatever reason. We still hope reduce that as much as possible. But the best case scenario, just from some of the numbers we're hearing, we might get, if they distribute the funds as they distribute other funds from the state based on our economically disadvantaged population, then Lovejoy is not going to get a significant help from those stimulus dollars. That's unfortunate. So even if we got 250,000, which is, we would be great. I mean, any number above zero would be helpful to put against your COVID relief. However, your fund balance is still going to take, in this scenario, a 3.1 to a 2. Let's say we get a little bit of relief of a 2.8 million in hit from current year. So looking at a designated amount of 1.3 million for another year to come out of that and to keep Lovejoy Elementary School open for one more year inefficiently, I think that it would be irresponsible for the administration to recommend that. I mean, you can choose to do that, but it would be irresponsible for us to recommend that you do that and to draw that from fund balance at that level, knowing that you're already going to be down to almost 6 million in fund balance. And for a cash flow perspective, as Ms. Adams brought up a moment ago, that we're going to have an issue with cash flow if we get to that level of spending.
I would just reiterate what I said earlier and what Dr. Womack just said. Thank you for summarizing that so well. And that we have had an outlay of cash for COVID. We have had impact on the current year because of COVID. I did have an opportunity, Mr. Owens, I'm going to catch you when you're going out, because I had an opportunity to look up the number I spout at him earlier, and we did on October 31st was our lowest draw, and we were at 2.7. So I don't know if that was just living these numbers all the time, or I'd like you guess, but we drew it down to 2.7 in October. And so that was out of a $9 million fund balance, and that is going to be significantly reduced towards $6 million. And so we have had some COVID impact, absolutely. Our recommendation on this is really around the financial health and the financial prudent thing to do and being good stewards of our taxpayer dollars. It hurts our hearts. It's not an easy recommendation, but we cannot, as he said, and he said it as well as we could, we can't responsibly recommend to you that that we continue to operate at a 56% to 60% capacity when we know how difficult and how precious the funds are to continue all the programs throughout the entire district and to make those things sustainable. So, operating at another year, choosing to wait a year is certainly the board's choice. But if you do that, you're going to draw $1.3 million out of the fund balance in addition to that. And then for sustainability of moving forward with the other programs, it's going to make it significantly more difficult, and it could put the district in the position of definitely having to use a tax anticipation note. And I don't say that to scare you. It's my job to be upfront with you and to tell you what I do know. A lot of what I do know are based on estimates, are based on historical information, and are based on decisions that are not made in Lovejoy ISD. They're made in Austin. But I have to be the bearer of that news. So I don't know if that answers your question, Ms. Smith, but.
Jay, if we had 2.9 or 1.3 million to keep it open for another year, is this a recurring problem? It's going to come up next year and the year after? I mean, we're projecting 10 years worth of declining enrollment. So we're talking about a minimum of $12 million over 10 years.
No, and that's the reason that the administration went in and looked at this is not just a one-year problem, not just a two-year problem. If it were a bubble, then it would make this a really difficult decision, but it might be that we could recommend it in a different way. But we definitely cannot sustain operating our campuses at such a low efficiency with the overhead cost of that. The heart is in every single personnel unit that we have, every single person that we have to serve Lovejoy ISD students. And we value each and every one of them. But our job, my job specifically, is to make sure that you know how we're spending that money. And so if it were a one-year issue, that would be a totally different conversation, because it wouldn't be responsible for us to recommend that we do something like this and then have to reverse and change track. So we have to use the information that we have available to us, that demography that was given to us before COVID existed. And that's a point that I also want to make, is that I know that there's been a lot of conversation around COVID. I do believe COVID accelerated it. That's just my anecdotal belief, because if you look at the numbers that were given to us, but the study was done before the pandemic started. The study was presented in January of 2020. That was pre-pandemic. And so if anything, pandemic accelerated the slow growth, but we have to work with the information that we have from a demographer who has been deadly accurate for us for many, many years. It's not something that we don't have a lot of information on.
Do you believe that we're going to be getting ahead of this continual year after year budget fight? Some of the community has been bringing this up tonight. They said, hey, every year it seems like we're back at the table again. Is this actually going to do that, do you think?
You are asking an opinion, and it's my job to share with you, with the information that I have. I will tell you that one thing that I've learned very early in school district finance is that forever means 2 years. The legislature meets every 2 years, and our situations can change anytime that they meet. And our job is to respond to whatever those changes in law are. The difficulty in specifically in our district, the difficulty that we faced over the last decade, and it really started after the recession of 2008 with the repeal of ASETAR, the change in the taxing structure that began in 2011, which was ironically about a $6 to $7 million decrease in what we were getting paid per year. The change to that has been impacted every 2 years that they've met. The impact has changed a little bit. And so I think it would be naive of me to say that this will fix it forever, because I don't believe that we have the power to do that. That's not in our hands. We don't get to set the state funding formulas. What the board has set is a priority around those things that are unique in Lovejoy, and that we know they have a dollar value. And that dollar value is right now around $3.3 million for those to protect those things that are unique and different in Lovejoy. They do come with a cost, so the financial cost. And so the references to, continual ways to get out of financial constraints really started in 2011. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes that was that we had to reduce expenditures in some area so that we could pass on an increase to our teachers or to our staff. We went 4 years without doing that. That erosion of our competitive nature with other teacher pay then starts impacting our heart, because it starts impacting that teachers can go to another district and get paid at a higher rate. And so we had to make those decisions in order to pass on raises. There are programs, and I mentioned security, who I love, and I love that I like being at work knowing that the security staff is here. Just personally, but there is a cost that comes to that. And so we didn't get influx of extra money for those things. We don't get influx of extra money for those things. So we have to figure out with what we have, what can we do with it? And so this recommendation is probably the single year most, the deepest level of budget impact that we've had, because it is combined with our actual funding mechanism. We have not been in a losing enrollment situation. So the enrollment that we've had has typically grown and helped us to continue to support the programs that we've had. Even on years that we were growing in enrollment, we still had cuts that we had to make, because we are funded based on a typical educational program, and we don't provide a typical educational program. And so these cuts are deeper and I believe more sustainable than what we have experienced in the past, because some of them are well, there's $850,000 in administration pieces there that if we sustain those cuts, then that's almost $1 million, and that's year over year. It's not for 1 year, it's a year over year savings. If we don't continue to operate inefficiently, we're looking at about a $1.3 million savings year over year, and creating some ways to serve our early education, which could be revenue flows. We've only included $130,000 of revenue flow in here because there are a lot of things that have to happen before that. So I do believe that it creates some sustainability, but can I tell you we're not going to ever face another budget conversation? Absolutely not. We probably will have that conversation in a couple of years because expenditures don't typically go down. There's a need for those to go up. And our funding mechanism, that House Bill 3 was an overhaul. It's the first overhaul, true overhaul that they've had of the system. Even with the former, I'm trying to remember which House bill it was, y'all, that did that created us. It was Senate Bill 1, wasn't it? That was not a complete overhaul of how the formulas were delivering dollars to the district. It was a change for some subset of districts that brought their funding down. We were included in that. It brought their funding down, but it wasn't an overall change as House Bill 3 was. And so we don't see, if you're just asking my opinion, which you did, I don't see there being a major change in the way that funds are delivered to districts. And so in order for us to not continue to struggle with budgets, we've got to make some sustainable changes, which are included in this administration recommendation. We have got to stay at least at the enrollment that we've budgeted for, and create avenues for that enrollment to continue to be sustained, even if it's not within the district residents. And we've got to create additional revenue streams, which we have really, really worked hard at over the last several years. Because we have had a dependence on, and that's very related to that $3 million draw on fund balance, because we have created a dependence in order to help offset the cost of that premium program that we offer. We created a dependence on local revenue through enrichment camps, scoreboard partners, sports camps in the summer. We had interest income off of our fund balance, which, you know, we maximize as much as possible. If anybody has interest on anything right now, you know that it starts with a point. And so that's all been tremendously sucked down. So and our tuition programs, our pre-K program, all of that dependence are what really hit us hard during COVID this year, and that we hope we have some rebounds on in the future, and we hope to expand on those revenue enhancements. But the timing of all of that culminating together to the decisions that you're having to make tonight are just, they're very unfortunate, but I have to be upfront with you and let you know that I don't think this will be the last budget conversation we have, but I do think that many of the recommendations here are much more sustainable than some of the ones that we've had to make in the past.
And this budget doesn't include a raise for teachers.
Include a raise for anyone.
We're gonna have to address that because we have to keep our best, we have to keep our teachers.
The fund balance at all in this budget this year, or for the planned year, 21-22?
21-22, the recommendations we've given you are to balance the budget. So the only way we would be able to add to fund balance is if our enrollment exceeded that 300 additional students that we talked about. And it could, because we could have residents, we have the capacity for it. We could have residents move in. And so because we're not budgeting for those, we're not estimating the revenue for those, therefore not spending in association with those, then those could help replenish fund balance at a minimal level.
Yeah, the reason why I'm exploring this fund balance so much is I want to make sure that this decision is something that's not done lightly, and that we are absolutely considering the health of the school district in this next year, 21 and 22. We're not considering it for 22, 23 or beyond, or this year. How healthy are we going to be as a school district if we have a $6 million fund balance? And that's the decision. I don't know if I just asked a rhetorical question. But.
Sure if you did either, because we've talked about that, but I don't mind repeating it. And Mr. Allen, I just want to make sure that you heard me earlier. I looked up whenever Dr. Womack was speaking earlier, and so we've drawn down to $2.7 million in our fund balance during this current year. That changes year to year because it depends on different payments that you receive that we have no control over that you receive throughout the year. We have a very small sliver, $300,000 of federal funding that we receive. Federal funding comes to districts based on their the majority of it comes based on your low socioeconomic need. Some comes from special education programs that you deliver. And in our district, we get about $300,000 out of our $44 million. So it's a very, very small piece of that. We had some grants during different years that we've received, for $600,000. We've sought those at every level possible. Mr. Dillon has sought grants for our transportation. We have looked at every avenue that we can to bring in money to the district. At $6 million, if we draw down to that level in this next year, it will be an extremely thin line of cash flow. Will we make it through the year? Absolutely, we will. But it will require very close monitoring. And so to think of planning to draw an additional piece out of that is something I just want the board to consider.
What are some of the things that cause us to get in trouble with that fund balance if we don't make the number of students that we're talking about in this program?
Absolutely, we can't. The budget is only balanced if what actually is estimated comes to fruition at the end of the year. And so from a revenue side, and that's why I wanted to make sure that I shared that with you earlier of where we are using, what we're using for those estimates. And so if we do not reach the 4,374, if we don't reach that number of students who attend our schools at least 97% of the time, that's our historical rate is 97%, then that will have a substantial impact on our bottom line because we're estimating that revenue comes in. By the same token, in our expenditure side, we do not have contingency there. And so it is, all the contingency has been carved out of that, and there wasn't much to start with. But in order to cut down to this level, there's very little contingency there. So in the event that we have extraordinary expenditures that are above and beyond what is in the budget, we can't pay them unless it's an emergency. If we have a, God forbid, a tornado or something like that. But other than that, we can't even spend that money without the board approving an amendment. Or so we would bring an amendment to you. And so it is all based on estimates. We have a history, a very strong history of our estimates being very in line with what our actuals end up being at the end of the year, pre-COVID. But I don't know how, I don't really know that I can quantify for you how tight the margin is with $6 million because I can't tell you exactly what dollar amount will flow out each year or each month and what dollar will flow in. But historically, the fall, we have already been very tight with a $9 million budget. I'm sorry, a $9 million fund balance.
So all things being equal, you would prefer that to be 9 million.
Well, yes, sir.
We're estimating 6 million. To pay about 3 million even after the budget changes. So let's assume that we decide that we're going to go through with this. So there's going to be a little bit less in payroll this next 21-22 year. We're still tight even though you're estimating our payroll numbers are going to be lower.
Yes, but when you spread that, even though it is a reduction in payroll, and there's absolutely almost $3 million reduction in payroll, as you spread that over a 12-month period in comparison to where our fund balance is, it's not a substantial move of the needle.
Thanks.
Oh, and someone mentioned it earlier, we've spent about $1.6 million on COVID-related expenditures. And we do not anticipate even qualifying, much less receiving the majority of that. But whatever we do receive will go to replenish fund balance. Anything that we finish this year in, and I've done some analysis on how we potentially could finish the June 30 year. And really, the best case scenario is that we would draw 2.6 million out. The worst case scenario, we would draw about 3.1 million. So again, when you look at the delta of that, there's a lot of money, and that's no doubt. But when you look at that as a fraction of the $44 million budget that we have, it's a really small margin.
And we have to decide by May 10th what that number is really going to be, the largest portion of that number is going to be.
Almost all of the recommendations that we have for expenditure reductions, because 85% of our budget is in personnel, almost all of them are personnel related. And so even though we may be able to place some of the teachers or the staff that, even though we may be able to place them in a position, we have to know the number of contracts that we need to issue, at what grade level they need to be at, and what certifications are required in order to move forward with that. That all has to happen by May 10th.
Correct. If we don't decide, we have to decide this evening if we're going to make May 10th. If we don't make May 10th, what's going to happen?
If we don't notify people by May 10th around their contracts, they'll automatically renew, correct?
Contracts at today's numbers. Thanks.
Can you talk a little bit about, as I also heard, even in today's conversation or public comment around the heart and the thought around, does the heart extend down even to elementary school and all that? I'm personally, I've had one son who's in college. I have another one's about to graduate, and I still have another that's a freshman in high school, but they've all got to experience the heart. And one of the things that's concerned me is not being able to continue to protect the heart for even all the elementary school kids, because they're not going to be in elementary forever. When I moved here, my kids were in elementary school. Now they're not, but they got to experience the heart, right? And so I know if I'm an elementary school parent today, and my kids haven't got to experience what they're going to potentially experience, which is unique. Let me talk a little bit about that, because I think that gets lost sometimes in this. It's not that we're putting, if we make this decision, we're not trying to shoulder our elementary school kids. In fact, I'm personally trying to do it so I help them and give them something in their future. Because if you start to take it away now, the genie's out of the bottle, in my mind. So maybe talk a little bit about that heart and how it already extends into the elementary school, but also in general.
Absolutely. So if you look up at the screen, Ms. Adams has pulled up what we typically refer to as the heart. And really, if you look at the first few items, those are more secondary centered. But if you look at the gifted and talented program, that's a K through 12 program. We could absolutely put restrictions in place or increase the requirements to be gifted and talented. We could increase that higher so that less kids get identified as gifted and talented. I don't think that serves a good purpose for our kids personally. I would hate for us to do that. I would hate for us to create a system that doesn't provide the same level of gifted and talented instruction that we do today, especially at our lower grade levels. Special ed, special education, that program, it's not uncommon to hear that people have specifically moved to Lovejoy so that they can have their students in our special education offerings. And so that again is a K-12 program, and really it even extends a little bit beyond 12 as we provide those services to kids that are between 18 and 22 in the district. And so both of those, there's what's called the minimum level that you can provide services, and then there's what we provide in Lovejoy, and it's more enhanced. It's more geared towards where our students' needs are. Instead of providing a vanilla program, in particularly in our special education group, our program is really designed to meet the needs of each kid that's in there. And when Ms. Fuller mentioned earlier about looking at each kid's IEP, their individual education plan, and the services that they provide are agreed upon to provide. That's really talking about each kid and that level of services that we do provide to each one of them. Our conference period structure is more at a secondary, 5th grade and up level. Our content coordinators, though, is K-12. That is providing the teachers the level of support that they need to provide instruction in their classroom. Our curriculum is robust, and it has to be. Our parents send us some awesome kids that have their baskets already partially full when they come to us. And our job isn't to just fill the basket up to the top, but really fill it to where that kid's potential says they should be filled. And we could stop at the top of the basket and not really press any further, but that doesn't serve the purpose of education in my mind. I think that we want to continue to push kids as hard as they can be pushed to really achieve higher and higher areas that they didn't even know they could. That's really what's behind our content coordinators, of providing instruction in a way that meets every kid in that classroom, each kid in that classroom. And it might look different for each kid in terms of how well they learn. Our digital literacy coaches, even though we'll have some changes in that program, we'll still be providing the same services that provides, as well as with our library media specialists, as we said earlier. It's a revamping of that and providing the same services, just providing it a little bit different. Today, our library media specialists have the opportunity to work with our staff to really integrate technology into their lessons, along with our digital literacy coaches, to help them utilize our resources at the highest level. And then, and again, that's K-12. That's not just at the secondary level. Professional development, again, is K-12. Mr. Musers talked earlier about the reading academies that our staff are being trained in, to really allow them to support their kids further, especially at the K-2 and the early literacy learning opportunities, and then moving that up into our 3-4 grades. Professional development has been a keystone to Lovejoy. We have invested heavily in training teachers to be able to provide the level of rigor and the enrichment of our programs to our staff. And so when you look at all of that, there's levels of value that could be placed on them. And Ms. Adams placed that value just a moment ago, which we've all known is around $3.3 million. We could be a common school district. There is no doubt. We could absolutely cut everything that's up there on that screen and become just a regular school district, just like, because that's the way we're funded from the state, is to be just a regular district. But this district has always valued the exceptional and enrichment that is provided by those classroom teachers every day. Not just the classroom teachers, but the programs that we have. We could go to be just regular, but I don't think we're satisfied. I don't think our public would be satisfied with just being regular. I think that they want you to continue, and you hear it. That you may not have heard it tonight from this group, but you do hear the passion behind this group, that they are passionate about what they are provided, and they think that that's not going to continue. And that's so far from the truth, that we're going to continue to provide that same level of love, the same level of care and nurturing to all students, regardless of what building they're physically in. It'll be the same set of teachers, the same administrators on those campuses that are loving those kids daily and providing those services. And yes, we can do it more efficiently. Absolutely. And so when you look at the heart, you cut everything up there. We could go do that tomorrow. It'd be very difficult. There is a lot of personnel tied into what's up there. When you talk about double blocking our math and English at the 5th and 6th grade, that most of the little 4th grade girl that just talked tonight, she'll be in 5th grade next year. She will not get a double block math and English. The amount that we know for a fact that our kids get from double blocking at the 5th and 6th grade level is huge. That's what allows them to tackle the 7th and 8th grade curriculum and take high school courses as 8th graders. Our kids are done with Algebra 1 at 8th grade. And not only done with it, they perform very well on the end of course exam that is required to be taken. So when they get into high school, they have more opportunities. And so we start it young, move it all the way through 5th and 6th grade, 7th and 8th grade, and then our 9th through 12 program. So it is true that some of those items are only secondary driven, but the vast majority of them, if you count them up, have an impact on our K-12 program as a whole.
Years ago, we took a cut out of this. We actually cut 8th period at the middle school. And I think a lot of people wanted to cut our throats in the community because of their kids' experience. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yes, sir. So when you cut down to a 7-period day, you take one option off the table. I'm sorry, for kids. Where we saw the biggest impact on kids is making them choose between, especially during their exploratory years of 7th and 8th grade, making a decision on whether or not they wanted to participate in a certain athletic or a certain fine art. Today, they get the opportunity to participate in both. And that's the advantage of an 8-period day, is that you have that option with your core subjects, your electives that you have, but though by having 8 periods, you can have an elective in a fine art and an elective in an athletics area. And so when we cut the 7 down to a 7-period day, what we saw is a huge decrease in our fine arts. Most of our kiddos chose to continue in the athletic areas, and many of them did not choose a fine art. And what's unfortunate about that is that the quality of our fine arts program, even as they moved into high school, we're seeing lower numbers in fine arts, from orchestra to band to choir to theater. All of those areas are impacted because of that decision to reduce down 1 period for 1 year at the middle school. And it's unfortunate because at the last board meeting, Bryce McCaslin stood up here and he talked about some of our art kids. And he talked about kids that didn't know that they even had a love for art. And once they got into an art class, the light went on. And he talked about how their confidence increased in how they would put themselves out there and put themselves into their artwork. That's what we're talking about by not offering an 8-period day like at the middle school when we cut it. Those kids didn't have that opportunity, and now they've moved into high school this year, and that's where we're seeing the decline in our fine arts enrollment.
After we did that, I heard from some families, and I hadn't even thought of this because it's hard to think of everything, right? Kids that are needing the extra help in the double block math and English, then they had no elective when it went down to 7 because they were filling up with just the core stuff. So that was another thing. So then you had kids that the only thing they had was maybe outside of school if they took art or dance or played sports. So just to back that up, it was bigger even than what we had just thought with the fine art athletic thing. There were some that got no elective.
Really, in our electives as a whole, I mean, from our STEM electives at the middle school, from the technology applications, robotics, all of those were impacted because they no longer had that capability to fit it in within their 7-period day. Throw out in 2013, it was actually in 2012 and moving into the spring of 2013. Mr. Collins, you'll remember you were on the board at that time, and Mr. Lynchenberg, you were on the board. And it was when we were deciding how to, the decision to move the 5th grade and to Sloan Creek. And I remember those board meetings leading up to that, and we had some parents that were just so opposed to that because they didn't want their 5th graders at that, what they thought was a middle school program, because they belonged at the elementary level. And I just remember going through that process and the difficulty that the board was grappling with over making that decision to put the 5th and 6th grade at their own campus and the 7th and 8th grade at a campus. And it was financially driven. It was a financial decision to not have to duplicate the same services by having 2 middle schools. And so by doing that, you just look back, just in the time that you've been here and on the board, those of you that weren't on there then, about the success of our 5th and 6th grade program. And I'm not suggesting that that those will be indicative of what we'll see with if you make the decision to go with 2 K-4 programs. But I am saying that the same love and heart of our staff, from the principals, our teachers, our counselors, will be the same. We're going to invest in every kid, each kid, every day. And that's our goal. That's our mission. That's what we do for a living. That's what we want to do. That's why I went into education, is to work with kids, because you want to see them grow and develop, and for their minds to really get out there. It's amazing to me when you see the light bulb go off and they get it, and whatever it is, whatever the concept is you're working on. And so I have no doubt that those accomplishments will continue regardless of the structure. Even if you did a K2, 3, 4 campus, we could make that be the best K2, 3, 4 campuses in the state of Texas and the nation. I have no doubt. And someone may think that I'm being pompous or arrogant. I'm just telling you what I believe. I honestly believe that our parents send us great kids, and our staff do amazing work with those kids, and we will continue that regardless of the configuration of our elementaries or the configuration of the district as a whole.
Thank you. Any part of the budget that we have not seen or looked at that we need to evaluate?
I can't respond that there would be a part that you haven't seen or evaluated. Excuse me, last year we did a thorough scrub of the budget. There were several areas where we talked about bringing those back to you. We did some cuts in some of those areas. Really, the personnel budget is such a large portion of our budget. It's the only place that we can move the needle. What is left in our non-personnel budget is hardly even described as discretionary. It's utilities and maintenance and operation cost, custodial expenditures, and our legal requirements. So we have independent audits every year that we're required to have. We have tax collection fees that we pay to Collin County, in the appraisal district. We have recapture. All of those things, are around $6 million, and there's very, very little excess. There's no excess. It's not what I would consider, especially in Lovejoy, that I would consider discretionary. It's really not discretionary expenses, insurance premiums. And so, yes,
Yeah.
unfortunately, across the state of Texas.
Our last audit, what was the date of that audit?
We have an audit. We have an audit following every fiscal year. And so our fiscal year ended on 6/30. The audit began in August and was presented to the board last October.
Any qualifications in that audit when we had it? I'm asking some leading questions that I already knew answers to, but I'm trying to help answer some questions for a gentleman that asked me a minute ago that I really didn't answer well. So,
That as well. All on our website for the last
Yeah.
5 years.
so there's the answer to part of what you asked.
For the audit that ended in 1920 was around 160,000. For the current year, it'll be about $250,000, about 259,000. A lot of increase in House Bill 3. We did have a positive change in recapture because they did overhaul the way that that was calculated. 2 years ago, before House Bill 3 was implemented, we paid $1 million in recapture.
Some of the community members tonight brought up an issue about what is the air quality in our classrooms?
So yeah, the when schools are built, any building, but schools in particular, when they're built, they have to meet whatever the ASHRAE standards are at that time, which all of ours obviously met. And there's checks and balances on that through the construction process. All of our buildings meet or exceed the ASHRAE standards for air quality and air movement within the classrooms. In fact, the cycle of air, meaning how often or how frequent the air turns over within the classrooms, we know exceeds what our ASHRAE standards are, because we know that fresh air and fresh air makeup into the system leads to higher instruction. Good quality air is important for learning, believe it or not. And we definitely want to utilize that every way we can. And so we on purpose design our systems. We don't share an air unit between rooms. Each room has its own air unit, which is important, so that that way that room is being satisfied individually and not dependent upon a combination of 2 rooms or 3 rooms as some schools do it. So that's the way Lovejoy has done it in the past, and all of our buildings meet that same criteria. Every one of them, including the high school facility, is built that way.
Any other questions or comments from the board that you'd like to make?
Are we going to talk about security a little more? Is that right now or later? Or?
No, yes, ma'am, but it is later.
included in item 8.
What you have before you in item 7 is really the reconfiguration of the K-4 programs. The administration's recommendation is to go to 2 K-4 programs and to repurpose Lovejoy Elementary School for our early childhood center and to utilize Puster and Hart as those 2 K-4 campuses.
Is there anything we've not thought of or asked? I mean, I'm like racking my brain. Have we uncovered every question, thought? I'm just like we're kind of blue in the face, but I just want to make sure we didn't miss some.
I'm not aware of anything offhand. You know, this conversation of as Ms. Adams said earlier about looking at budget has extended further in the past than all of you have participated in some shape, form, or fashion. We've looked annually at a lot of these, the idea of transportation, the idea of extracurricular fees, the potential of increasing class sizes or decreasing services. I mean, all of those have been on the table. Those in the past, I remember when the board, not this particular board, but the board was so opposed to advertising at our stadiums, both baseball, softball, and football, because you didn't want it to look like NASCAR at that time. And now you've really come to a different point of, well, we want the revenue from those to help fund what you feel are the core parts of the enhancements that we provide above and beyond other school districts. So over time, to your question, Ms. Smith, I'm not sure what else that we can lay on the table.
If there's no other discussion or any comments, if we choose to move forward, we're going to have a motion. So if there's someone who wants to make a motion, they'll need to do that. If there's any other comments relative to this particular vote and want to share either with the community or with the board or our administration, now's the time. I'll just give you my thoughts. For me personally, said it before, I grew up on that stage. I went kindergarten through 6th grade in this building, and it means a lot to me personally. My little sister went here. As I think about this decision, it's not an easy decision. Looking at all the facts, like we as a board, you have to look at all the facts, almost like a jury, try to look through every lens, try to turn over every rock you can. Having individual conversations with community members at every level, stakeholders, and just try to examine as many facts as possible, and understanding that we're in a really tight position from both timing and from fund balance, which scares me, to be honest with you. I don't think we have the luxury, unfortunately. And I look at it, I've got, some of it may say, you don't have children in elementary school. My kids all grew up here. And I know, I mentioned it earlier, I know the experiences my own kids have gotten I've got a third grade nephew in the district that's in elementary school. I coach a bunch of his little teammates. I care about every single one of them. I care about every family in this district. And so to make decisions like this is not easy. And, but it's the decision. We're on the board. We have to make tough decisions. And so for me, I look at it and I wish that we could get another year. I do. I'm so appreciative of our community, of fighting for dollars and fundraising and all of that. I just don't see it being feasible to be able to extend a year. Talking about Shay, what you shared with us around cash flow, that makes me nervous. I also believe we could do exactly what you just said a while ago, Dr. Womack. We could just cut all the premium programs, but then that's cutting, and that's impacting every single student, whether they're in kindergarten today or pre-K. It would be their future in Lovejoy that would be impacted so significantly. That keeps me up even more of trying to figure out how do we fix and get a sustainable program so that we can continue funding that, because I do think it's so valuable. It is the reason why people come to Lovejoy. Whether you came here with elementary school kids, the reality is you came here because you saw them projecting later in life, matriculating through the system, and graduating from Lovejoy. At least I hope that's what you thought, and I think we're doing some pretty good stuff there. So for me personally, I'm looked at it every single way I can, and I just don't see another option but to do repurposing of this campus. And I hate to say that. This will be my, anyway, that's where I am.
I think it's super hard to deny there's an inefficiency. And when you first came to us with the K2, 3, 4, that eased my heart for Lovejoy. It eased my heart for all of the schools, because I thought, oh, well, that's great. They can all start together and no one's going to feel like their school got taken away from them. So that felt a little better, which then presents another problem of logistics and being able to get to K2 and 3, 4, and then people uncomfortable with moving schools multiple times. So I hate it. I hate it for people who bought in this neighborhood to walk to this school. I mean, it's devastating, and I don't know the solution around that. But I can't look away from the inefficiency, and I don't think we can do the K2, 3, 4 model. So that's right.
This has got to be the hardest thing I think I've ever faced. I've been talking to people now solid for 6 weeks or however long this started, since March, almost every day. Text messages, emails, personal conversations. I wanted anything to not have to make this decision, one way or another. K2, 3, 4, K4, not do anything at all. I would love to not be here, but we're here. There are people here who feel that they're going to lose something, and I know Lovejoy. Over these years, I have worked so hard for the school district. Hours and hours and hours on bonds, TREs, whatever we call it. Foundation, doesn't matter. Because I know that this district is bigger than any one problem it's facing. It's bigger than any superintendent. bigger than any individual parent. What makes Lovejoy Lovejoy is the fact we all believe that it's going to work. When I'm thinking about this over these weeks and weeks, as I've been thinking about this decision, all I can think about is what can the future look like? Is it going to be a death and then therefore everyone dies? Or are we going to have life after this decision? And we are. I know we will. I'm with you on that, Dennis. We will make it. I think Lovejoy's bigger than any one building. I have a better way of thinking about this. I just thought about this tonight, and that was a lot of ways the old adage about church, it's not the building, it's the people. I've got to believe that these teachers, the ones that are going to be here now, I'm so encouraged that the teachers that want to stay are going to have a place to stay, are going to love on these children in the younger grades, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9 through 12, just as much after any change as before. But to not make the change and put that ability for our kids to have that opportunity in jeopardy is what's facing this board right now. Would love to not have to make this decision. But we're here. We put it off and then put it off again, but we're here. This is, it's not easy for us. And there's going to be impact. Hart, Custer, all of them. There will be impact. I know that. But I also know that all of those kids in those elementary schools are going to have a future here. And it's going to be a great future.
Thanks for all the hard questions that we've had and the discussions we've had. And mine's a little more emotional because my 5th grader just came out of the school. I've had 3 kids go from kindergarten to all the way through. So this school's near and dear to my heart as well. But holistically, we've got to make the best decision for the financial welfare of the district. And I've been asked questions about whether or not we've seen financials and we've seen everything, and we've pretty much turned over every rock that I can think of or know of to look at. And I've even asked some of you, if you see a different way, you tell me. I'm willing to look at it. I'm willing to consider it. Maybe there's something I haven't thought of. But collectively, we have gone through every part of the financials that I could think of to see, every page. Audits, examinations of the books, and the thing that is overwhelmingly obvious is that the housing prices have accelerated to a point that young families can't live here. I mean, can't move in here at the same rate that they could at one point. When I moved into a $450,000, $500,000 house, and those are few and far between in our district. And with new housing being the primary growth factor of the district, at least at the foreseeable time, that's not changing. It's not achievable. It's not possible numerically. And so I think a fund balance of 6 million is concerning. And I've stressed that multiple times. And we are in a position to make a decision that will protect that. And I think we need to be thinking about how we're going to augment that versus just balance a budget. We can't continue to attract and retain great teachers by not paying them at a marketable rate. That's going to be an issue. Somebody asked a question about dealing with budgets, and we're going to continue to deal with issues with the budget going forward. Whether or not we get there quickly or not, I can't forecast that today. But I would love to have a year to decide to transition, but I believe in the greatness of all of you in our community, and we will overcome it together. Some of you may never agree, and that's fine. But ultimately, we're going to have to move beyond this and lead our children towards something positive in regards to this, and show them the leadership that they expect and deserve from us as a community and as parents. And so I just would appeal to you all to consider that, and know that we're making the best decision for the future of the district. Any other comments? If not, somebody want to put forward a motion? Obviously, a very hard decision tonight, folks. Not taken lightly. Any more discussion? Questions? Comments? If not, we'll need a motion. What is the motion? What's the motion to say?
Number 7 on your agenda.
I move we take action regarding the pre-kindergarten through 4th grade program restructure, including campus locations.
Second in. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. All right, item 8. Consideration and possible action regarding identification of employment areas affected by reduction in force.
So item 8 is a legal requirement as we go through the process of programmatic changes related to some of our recommendations to the board. And I'm almost there. There it is. So the first was the declaration of programmatic changes on March the 25th. Tonight, you're being asked to review the employment areas that are affected by those programmatic changes. And those are the district-wide library services. We're asking you to not include the district-wide security services tonight. We're asking that we hold on those. The district-wide security services, as was mentioned earlier, are not Chapter 21 term contracts, and that's significant because they don't fall under the same requirements and subject to the same timelines as the teacher or administrator contracts, which are on a very limited timeline. This would allow us more time to work internally, work with our community to find an option or ways that we could hopefully provide the funding to continue having an officer at each campus. Our program, I know, is expensive, and you get the protection that you pay for by having someone on each campus. It was hard for the administration to put this on the list, but when you're $6 million in the hole for next year, all items have been on the table. I think that we've had some significant movement from the community, and particularly our foundation has been willing to help with the collection of donations to continue the program. I know on Tuesday they will be launching a campaign for the safety and security payroll for three officers to keep 6 in the district as a whole. And to be just candid with you, I'd like to see them succeed. And I would like for the administration to do whatever we can do to help them succeed on that. And so I would ask that you not include that part of the programmatic change in tonight's recommendation, and that you do include the library services and the district administrative changes that Ms. Adams went over earlier on the screen that you've seen, gosh, over the last month. It's 11 positions, 850,000. And I'm not sure why there was some misunderstanding by one of our folks that spoke that said that these are vacant positions, because they're not. These are real live people that work here with me and work with the staff and work for this community every day. And it's hard, but they understand and understand our need. And then lastly, the decision you just made in item 7, which is the district-wide elementary campus design, is included in this piece of the requirement for the reduction in force due to programmatic changes. So just to recap: library services, district-wide administration, and then our elementary campus design.
I appreciate you suspending the security. I actually just spent the last week in Vegas at the National School Safety and Security Conference, and I've never been more convinced that we absolutely need somebody on every single campus. I can go on and on about every story I heard about the difference, the structure we have by having one at every campus is so much more than the safety. It's the relationships these people have with our kids, and they have the ability to have that situational awareness that is critical on every campus. And not only that, the preparedness. If you have somebody attention focused on safety, they are constantly in pursuit of being prepared. And in every scenario I learned and heard from every expert, it comes from the preparedness. And if we lose somebody off of the campus, everybody else is tasked with so many things. And if safety is going to be the priority, we need somebody on that campus, keeping that campus safe. So if I've ever never been convicted more in my life, it was this week. Just to hear very specific superintendents telling stories of shootings on their campuses or other crises. So, and not to scare anybody, but we've already had 45 shootings this month. And the prediction of expectant is unfortunately high as you pull all these people back out of isolation. Those are usually the typical scenarios. So
I also feel like the logistics of the somewhat rural nature and the lack of police presence in our area is also a factor that augments the concerns around that. I think we're a high value target for that kind of mindset that may do something crazy like that. And I believe that having an armed officer on each campus is a priority. So, and I just applaud the community for the desire and the efforts that they put together, as well as the foundation for this grant proposal that they've made to allow for this funding to occur. And just encourage the community to grab a hold of that and help us achieve that goal.
So I agree completely with taking security off of the approvals tonight. As I've expressed in prior meetings, and as I've expressed folks individually in the community, I've never been comfortable with a reduction to 3. I do believe it's in the community's best interest that we be able to offer armed security at every campus. And to facilitate that, as a former foundation board member, I can tell you that Saturday is the foundation's annual Denim and Diamonds fundraiser. It's going to be a virtual event. On Tuesday, the live auction or the silent auction will begin. The foundation has set forth 3 family-funded grants at $80,000 apiece, which would cover the cost of 3 additional officers. Not one person has to bid and buy and pay for it all, but you can go in with friends and community members and build up donations to that effect. And I believe that will run through Sunday. So from Tuesday to Sunday, those family-funded grants are accessible from the foundation's website, I believe. And I would encourage everyone with an interest in helping support this effort to maintain security, armed security at each campus, to go to the foundation website and donate if you can and are willing to do so. That's one of the reasons why I think we should wait and see on security staffing rather than push something into the budget now that we may have to amend at a later date, as well as attempting to look for any additional solutions to provide security beyond community donations.
So I move that we, let me get the language right. Save and accept, or removing the security component. I move that we take action regarding the employment areas to be affected. To be library services, administrative, and the elementary campuses.
Second.
We have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Not an easy night. It's not an easy night for our community, not an easy night for our board. I echo those comments around, we need to rally together. Our kids, they see through our eyes. Their parents' eyes are what they're going to see any kind of change through. So however we can help make that transition as clean and as smooth and as positive as possible. I know you put kind of the plan out there, Dr. Womack. Going to need to fine tune that plan and create an experience second to none when you do have to make a tough change like this. So we know that our administration and your campus teams are going to do that. So we'll look forward to the next couple weeks seeing that plan communicated and come to fruition.
Absolutely. And just to reiterate, we'll circle back around and really work with our parents here at Lovejoy Elementary School, specifically upon where we put that attendance line and come to you on the 10th with a consensus on that. We will work with our campus administrators tomorrow, beginning tomorrow, to start the planning process. We've already been in touch with the PTOs, and so there is a plan there to integrate the PTOs of all three campuses together. No one will not get an opportunity to participate at the board level if they've already been elected for that, and so that's good news. But we want to tap into that group and really let them help us identify that transition planning for all kids at K4. And so it won't be a Hart transition and a Puster transition. It's going to be a Lovejoy transition for everybody. It's not it's not taking in the Lovejoy Elementary kids. This is our two new campuses as a whole. And so you'll see that from the staffing level as well. And as we work through those processes, we've got a very short timeline to get it all done, and we are up to that challenge, and we'll get it taken care of. And then we'll finalize the administrators for those two campuses and the staffing list, and we'll get that communicated as quickly as possible, as well as all of the events to help with the transition in terms of kids and parents getting an opportunity to feel more comfortable with the new configuration.
Last thing, Al, sorry this had to be your last votes. Yep. We've had just really appreciate you. You and I have been on this board for 9 years. We've had tough, difficult decisions that we've had to make. And this is probably the top of the list.
Yeah, this is definitely top of the list. And there's been some tough ones, but this one's at the top of the list. I think Marvin's right. Like the mindset I would have is how do we come out of this even stronger and better than ever before? And adversity and setbacks there's different ways to approach them, and I won't be on the board, but I will be very active in every other way that I can to try to make sure that this district remains and frankly just gets better as one of the very best opportunities in the state of Texas. So
But it's been a pleasure. And I'm very glad that I did it. So, thank you. Thank you. We will formally celebrate you in the coming month or two and at another board meeting. But can't say enough how much appreciate and respect you and your level of service. It's just absolutely tremendous. It's never been about you or your family or your kids. It's always been about the whole in every decision you've made. So thank you. Any other announcements?
No, sir. I will extend congratulations and thank you, a sincere thank you, Al, for all of your work and service. And even before you got on the board, your family has worked for the betterment of Lovejoy, and it's definitely been valuable and helped shape all of the programs that we have in place. Thank you so much.
We're adjourned.